A ragged wind hurtled down from the frostfangs, whispering through the blackened timbers of the old wildling palisade, and Jon Snow felt it like a blade pressed flat against his cheek. Ghost padded at his side, white fur bright against the half-light, breath silver in the frigid air. Beyond the broken wall of spruce trunks, embers of a dying cook fire glimmered. Sparks rose, swirled, and vanished into the dark, as though the night were swallowing the free folk one ember at a time. Jon tightened the black wool cloak at his throat and watched the snow drift, listened to the thousand small sounds of a camp on the edge of patience. Tormund Giantsbane was nursing a carved horn of sour goat's milk by the fire, his shoulders bent beneath layers of patched furs. He glanced up when Jon approached, one red-gold brow lifting like a question half-answered. "You walk like a ghost yourself, Crow," the big man said, voice gritty with drink and sleepless nights. "You'll scare the children if you keep haunting the camp at this hour." God. Jon sank onto a rough plank opposite him, feeling the smolder's warmth seep into his boots. "Children should know what walks in the woods," he answered. "Fear keeps them alive." Tormund grunted, set the horn aside, and scratched at the frost-rimed beard that dwarfed his broad jaw. "Fear's kept us alive plenty, aye. But so has hope. And there isn't much of that in sour milk and ashes." Jammer row. Across the clearing, a pair of young spearwives coaxed a kettle toward a fresh flame. Their voices rose and fell in a lullaby tongue Jon could not parse. Beyond them, hide tents sagged beneath the weight of new snowfall, their hides patched with rag rugs and sailcloth scavenged from the distant sea. The free folk were restless. Too many years beneath a southern sky. Too many dead and scattered after the Dragon Queen's fall. Winter's edge had driven them north again, but the north they'd found was colder than the stories promised. Jon's fingers curled around a strip of charred wood. "We'll need to move camp come dawn," he said. "Hunt farther west, near the Milkwater. The herds have drifted that way." Tormund's gaze followed Ghost, who had lowered his muzzle toward the shadows at the tree line. "And if the herds are gone too? Frozen or taken by other hungry folk?" His chuckle carried no mirth. "Tell me, King Crow, what happens when hope starves?" Jon flinched at the title. He was no king, not here, not anywhere. Yet in the weeks since they crossed the wall at Castle Black, the free folk had fallen back into old habits. Chieftains squabbling, boasting, some quietly claiming the mantle of Magnar or Raynar. They looked to Jon, some with gratitude, some with suspicion, most with a weariness too deep for words, because there was no one else to look to. "Food first," Jon murmured. "Then shelter. Then we think on hope." Tormund's eyes narrowed, studying him. "Aye. But food and shelter won't mend what's cracked between clans, or heal folk who saw dragons burn their world apart. They need more than meat in their bellies. They need a reason to stand beside one another again." "Bezolam?" Jon did not answer. The dying fire spit sap and whispered its own counsel. Some secrets burn, some scald, and for a heartbeat he saw a woman of silver hair turning toward him, eyes bright with a dream of broken chains. The memory hurt like a bruise pressed too hard. He rose, pausing only to lay a gloved hand on Tormund's shoulder. "Wake whoever's on watch," he said. "There's movement in the forest tonight." The woods were thick with hush. Moonlight skated across crusted drifts, and dark boughs sagged beneath ice sheaths that chimed when the wind shook them. Ghost flowed ahead, silent as snowfall itself. Jon's breath was careful, measured. He tasted pine resin and something wilder, sharper, the musk of horses. He crouched at the edge of a frost-raw clearing littered with hoofprints. Dozens of prints, deep and round, the snow churned to a gray porrid. He pressed a hand to the nearest hollow. Still warm beneath, not yet frozen. Riders, Southbourne.Hogni. No free folk horse herd left tracks so wide. Ghost lifted his muzzle, ears pricked. At the far side of the glade, a shadow shifted, low and lithe. Jon's hand found the grip of Longclaw. Though the sword's wolf-head pommel felt heavier than memory, its weight a token of vows both kept and broken. A figure emerged. A woman wrapped in fur-lined leather, moonlight glancing off curved blades at her hips. Her hair had been braided in a looped tail, black as wet obsidian. She halted when the direwolf bared teeth, but her eyes, wide and intent, never left Jon. In them, he glimpsed a fierce confusion, the look of someone who has seen a ghost and refuses to flee. His tongue found a greeting from half-forgotten lessons. Ser Jorah had muttered on Dragonstone. "Azoth," he said, "the old Dothraki for peace." The word felt brittle on his lips. The woman's brow creased. Her hand touched the hilt beneath her cloak, but slowly, testing. Jon lowered Longclaw. "You're far from warm grass," he continued in the common tongue, "and I have no wish for blood under this sky." She answered in the guttural rhythm of the great grass sea, rolling consonants like hoofbeats. Only fragments reached him. Khalasar, lost, riderless. When his blank stare persisted, she repeated herself, slower, then tried again in a halting accent. "Our fires die," she said. "We seek shelter. Trade, maybe." Her chin raised, pride tempered by need. Winter is enemy of all horse peoples. A flicker of memory. Khal Moros riders galloping across King's Landing's wide way, hair streaming behind. Many had perished in dragonfire. Others had wandered east, some west, scattered like seeds in a gale. How many had crossed the neck? These few had found the last place anyone expected. "Shelter is scarce," Jon said. "But talk can be warmer than steel. Come with me. No harm tonight." She hesitated, then nodded, whistling low. 3 more riders drifted from the trees, horses snorting white plumes. They passed through the broken moonlight, and in that moment, Jon saw hunger carved into cheekbones, desperation stitched in worn saddles. He felt it echo in the hollow spaces of his own heart. Ghost led them back, pacing at Jon's side. Lanterns glowed within the camp now. Fire pits kindled. Spearwives stiffened when the strangers appeared. Free folk warriors stirred, muttering in wary tongues. But no arrows loosed. Jon raised a hand, palm open, and Tormund emerged, surprise etched in every bristled line of his beard. "More bloody Southrones," the big man rumbled, but his eyes softened when he saw the bones prowling beneath the rider's skin. Hungry folk looked the same in any tongue. Jon met the Dothraki woman's gaze. "Tell them," he said, "we have stew and furs and questions in equal measure." He glanced to Tormund. "And tomorrow we hunt west, perhaps with new riders at our flank." Tormund barked a laugh that sent ravens flapping from the nearby pines. "First crows, then free folk, now horselords. Soon you'll have every lost soul at your hearth, Snow." Jon listened to the ravens' wings fade. "And if that keeps them from killing one another in the dark, maybe it's worth the crowded hall." Dawn broke grudgingly through a seam of sullen clouds. Snowflakes drifted, fat and lazy, hinting at the storm crouched behind the horizon. Jon stood on a rise overlooking the camp. Below, free folk were packing travois, cinching leather bundles, stamping frost from boots. The Dothraki horses grazed near the palisade, steam pluming from their nostrils. The riders kept apart but watched everything, wary, curious, half ready to leap into flight. A hand brushed Jon's elbow. Val, the spearwife princess, had drifted to his side. She was wrapped in a snowfox cloak, pale hair bound in a braid high as a crown. Her blue gaze swept across tents and riders, and restless children. "You gather strays," she said, her voice cutting the wind. "But strays still bite." Jon's mouth twitched. "And teeth are useful if pointed at the right enemy." Val studied him. "Who is the enemy now?" "The Night King is Ash. The dead are gone. South of the wall. Sansa sits lady in Winterfell. The Stark boy commands ravens from King's Landing. Is your enemy hunger or loneliness? Or is it the self you cannot outrun?" The question hung between them like mist. Jon folded his arms. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if we don't share what comfort we have, winter will find us easier prey than any army of dead men." Val inclined her head. Perhaps in agreement. Perhaps only acknowledgement that his path was his own. "We march soon," she said, then turned away, boots crunching. Jon watched her go. In his pocket lay a scroll sealed with wax bearing the direwolf of House Stark. A raven had come 2 nights past, Bran's spidery hand, each line cool as deep water. The realm of men trembles, brother, though they do not yet feel the quake. Storms rise from east and west. Ships gather in the stepstones. Keep watch on the cold edge. The letter ended with a phrase unmoored from time. All threads converge where the loom is strongest. Jon did not pretend to fathom his brother's meaning, but he sensed, in the marrow of his rehabilitated bones, that the world's fractures were not mended merely because a crown had found a head. The trek to the milkwater cut across ridges sagging with powder. The sun never fully breached cloud cover, casting the land in a perpetual dim glow that flattened color and distance alike. Free folk moved swift in file, weaving between birch trunks and over iced brooks. The Dothraki kept pace on horseback, though their mounts struggled in drifts. One rider dismounted to lead her stallion by the reins, speaking low in a lilting cadence that even winter could not swallow. Ghost started ahead. Jon marched near the fore with Tormund, Val, and the Dothraki woman whose name he had learned by the morning fire. Vihanna, once blood of my blood, to a Khal dead at the Dragon Queen's side. She rode with her chin lifted, but there were moments when the wind caught her cloak, and the ache beneath shone stark. They camped at twilight beside the river's frozen shallows. Tormund organized hunting parties, while Val's soft whistle gathered children into circles where she taught them knots and snares. Jon worked shoulder to shoulder with Vihanna totaling stores, measuring grain by mitzvah, dividing dried hair and seal fat into shares. The language barrier forced them into gestures, and the occasional borrowed word. He saw relief soften her features when she realized her riders would not be fed last. Night settled. The aurora rippled, green veils undulating across the sky like giants stirring beneath cloud robes. Jon stood apart from the fires, Longclaw's scabbard cold against his leg. He felt, distantly, the pull of something unseen weaving among these people. Free folk, Dothraki, wolves, ghosts, an invisible thread drawing them toward a design he could not imagine. The thought both steadied and frightened him. Tormund approached, breaking reverie. The riders tell stories of great grass seas, the wildling said, slumping onto a fallen pine trunk. Whole lifetimes spent chasing the sunrise. Imagine that. He eyed Jon. Why ride north if south is full of pasture? Jon shrugged. They followed the Dragon Queen. When she fell, they fled. South has lords who despise them, cities that fear their raids. Perhaps the wilderness feels less hostile. Tormund laughed, a deep rumble. Hostile is the very air we breathe up here. It's honest though, Jon replied. Wind is wind, snow is snow. They respect truths that don't change on a lord's whim. Tormund sobered, scratching his beard. You intend to keep them with us. I intend to keep them alive, Jon said. If they stay, we all stand stronger. Stronger for what? When Jon did not answer, Tormund leaned closer. The firelight flickered in his eyes. You're forging something, Crow. I see iron in the way you speak. If you mean to lead more than this ragged band, make sure the shape you hammer takes can withstand more than winter's bite. Jon opened his palm to the stars. I don't even know what I'm shaping. That's the first lie you've told tonight, Tormund said, rose, and left him to the Aurora's restless dance. Over the next fortnight, the Dothraki numbers swelled. Word traveled faster than hunger. There was a camp in the northern wastes where even horselords might find meat and flint and fires under open sky. One dawn, a long column of riders appeared beyond the milkwater, hooves pounding frost-hardened earth. Their horses stood thinner than the legends, but their braids were oiled, bells chiming a subdued music. Jon met them at the riverbank, flanked by Tormund and Val. Vihanna translated. These newcomers belonged to Khal Ithoko, who had sailed with the Dragon Queen's fleet, lost half his followers at sea, the rest to southern swords. Now they carried his bones in a sack of grass, seeking ground to bury their Khal beneath a sky bright with stars. Jon found himself promising a cairn of stone atop a ridge that watched both river and forest. He did not know Dothraki prayers, but he ordered the free folk to help haul stones, and when the cairn rose, he placed the first banner on the apex. A strip of weather-stained wool, painted with a dire wolf, black on gray. Khal Ithako's riders bowed. fists to chests. Ghost howled, a long note that trembled in Jon's breast. Val whispered, "Wolves claim new territory." Supplies dwindled faster each sunrise. Hunters brought back elk ribs, Arctic fox, snow grouse. But mouths multiplied. Horseflesh appeared in stew pots. Dothraki accepted the sacrifice with solemn nods. Still, nights lengthened, and more clans arrived. Notchier's band from the Gift, Nil's Northwind wanderers, then a clutch of winter townfolk, driven beyond the wall by debts and famine south of it. The camp sprawled across 2 river bends now, fires like distant constellations. Jon found himself chairing councils by cedar torches. Arguments sputtered. Free folk who bled for the right to remain free, balked at sharing hunts with riders who once raised villages. Dothraki balked at foot soldiers dictating grazing grounds. When words failed, daggers flashed. Jon stepped between blades, voice ringing sharper than steel. He invoked memories of the dead, men and women who had stood together before darkness unmade the world. Shared loss, he claimed, was the iron of new brotherhood. Some listened, some scowled. But, gradually, bloodletting slowed. One night, around a smoky hearth, Vihana spoke to him in practice rough Westerosi. "You keep talking of bonds," she said, stirring a pot of pine needle tea. "In the grass sea, bonds are made by blood rides, by wedding, by strength. What binds wolf and horse here?" Jon considered. "Necessity," he said. "And choice. There's power in choosing to stand beside someone when you could as easily slit their throat." She sipped, grimaced at the bitter tang. "Choice can change like wind. So can strength," Jon answered. "But stories last." Bayana's brow furrowed. "Stories." Jon reached into the firelight, pinched a burning twig, and traced arcs in the air. Sparks swirled. We remember the long night because people told the tale. They remembered heroes rising together against doom. If we survive this winter as one, someone will carry that story beyond snow and grass, across seas. That story will make a kingdom where none existed. She watched the sparks fizzle in snow. "Kingdom," she echoed, rolling the foreign weight in her mouth. "A khalasar of snow and stone." Her smile, small and wary, suggested the thought did not repulse her. Storms came like wolves. For 7 days, sleet slashed canvas, ice-crusted beards, tents collapsed beneath loaded branches. Jon lent his shoulders to raising windbreaks. He handed axes to free folk who once called him Crow Lover. He shared dried fruit with Dothraki children, who stared at Ghost in awed terror. In the roar of wind and creak of trees, he sensed the camp transform. Ragged tents drawn closer. Cook fires pooled into communal hearths. Quarrels drowned beneath weather's howl. People leaned on one another because the storm permitted no distance. On the 8th day, a hush settled, heavy as a held breath. Snow draped every branch. The sky glowed pale gold at dawn. Jon walked among sleeping forms, stepping over bundled families knit together for warmth. He saw a Dothraki boy curled against a free folk hound, a spearwife using a saddle blanket to shield an unfamiliar horse. These sights filled him with a tenderness so sharp it made him ache. Beyond the far reaches of camp, at the frozen waterfall, Bran awaited him. Or so the raven perched on Jon's shoulder suggested, the weight of its talons insistent. Jon trekked through knee-high drifts until he reached the fall, now a towering sculpture of ice. There, amid the silent grandeur, stood a young man draped in leather and wool, hair brown as bark, eyes fathomless. Bran did not smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched, as if at an old joke. "Brother." Bran's voice carried like water beneath ice. The threads tightened. Jon exhaled steam. "You come in person?" "Not entirely," Bran said, glancing to a rook that fluttered on a nearby branch. "But enough." He appraised Jon, his snow-caked boots, the wolf at his heel, the weight around his shoulders invisible but crushing. "You gather armies without banners." "Armies?" Jon echoed. "Starving refugees, Bran. Armies are born of hunger." Bran's gaze seemed to pierce beyond flesh. South, the Ironborn raid the Sunset Sea. In the east, Warlords rise in Moiraine's vacuum. And to the west, across the shivering sea, old powers test their chains. The realm fractures faster than the crown mends. If these folk you gather break apart, the north will bleed. Jon spread his hands. I offer food and fire. I have no throne to promise. A throne promises nothing, Bran said, tone flat. But a story, shaped wisely, sits firmer than iron. Unite these people, Jon. Forge a realm rooted not in castles, but in need and choice, as you told the rider. He eyed him. You are wolf and dragon. They will follow. Jon's breath hitched. I can't rule them. Rule is simply guidance tempered by sacrifice. Bran looked beyond the frozen fall, as though seeing centuries spill open. Lead them toward a tale worth telling. Ghost's ears twitched. Snow pattered down from a branch overhead. Jon thought of Daenerys standing before him, eyes wide with a dream too fierce to hold. He thought of the Night King's blue glare, the hush that had filled his bones when hope seemed a candle flickering in endless dark. And he thought of the camp, fires, voices, scents of horse and smoke intermingled, and felt something stir, an ember glowing in marrow too long chilled. I will try, he breathed. Bran nodded, already half gone, and the raven's sudden leap to sky. Make it so, brother. His voice echoed through feathered wings. Then the bird vanished into the pale dawn. Jon called a moot that night. Word spread swift. A council beneath the aurora. Free folk elders trudged in from lean toes. Dothraki blood riders reined their mounts on the slope above. A ring of torches sputtered around the clearing. At its center blazed a bonfire whose heat thawed the ice at Jon's boots. He stood beside Tormund and Val, opposite Vihayana, and two of Khal Ithakoa's senior riders. The crowd thrummed with murmurs in half a dozen tongues. Jon felt their eyes press against him. Expectation, suspicion, curiosity. He raised a hand. Silence rippled outward. Winter tests us, he began, voice carrying on wind's hush. It tests hunger, pride, and fear. Alone, we falter. Together, we endure. I've seen it. Free folk sharing bread with riders they once called raiders. Horselords offering horseblood broth to spearwives. Those storms bound us tighter than any oath. He paced the fire's circle. But storms pass, and when calm returns, wounds remember their ache. Old grudges wake. I ask you, shall we let them guide us back to blades and graves, or will we choose a new path? A shadowed hush followed. Jon drew Longclaw, point downward, and planted it in packed snow. There was a time swords named kings. I say a kingdom can rise without one crown. Let each clan keep its voice, its ways, yet swear to hold this land as one hearth. A league of the north at world's edge, where wolf, horse, and free heart stand shield to shield. Oh! Murmurs swelled, colliding currents of doubt and hope. A broken-nosed raider barked, and who speaks for your league when storms come again? Jon's chest tightened. Whoever the many choose, not one bloodline but council of all. I will not sit a throne. His gaze swept them. But I will serve the realm we craft, as watchman and sword, bound by the same law that binds each of you. Vayana stepped forward, firelight flickering against curved Arak at her hip. Horses need open plains, she called. Snow buries grass. Will your league feed our herds? Tormund boomed a laugh. We've more frozen rivers than grass, girl. But we've seal, elk, fish, and land, wild enough to roam from sea to shining wall. Share in that, and your horses will find footing. A spearwife lifted a child high. What law says the weak eat before the strong? She shouted. Jon answered, steady, the law we write tonight. Starvation makes no kings. Our children will grow only if every belly fills. The hush deepened, as if even the fire held its breath. Snow hissed in the flames. Then an elder freefolk woman, her hair white as bone, lifted a beaded hand. Words blow like smoke, Snow, she said. Show us the hearth you dream. She tossed a woven fetter, wolf teeth strung on sinew, at his feet. Bind us with deed. Jon bent, picked up the strand. felt the sharp bite of tooth tips. He tied it around his wrist. "By fang and flame," he vowed, "I will." And somewhere in the dark, drums began. Soft, uncertain, but growing. Dothraki palms on hide stretched across bowls, free folk stamping boots. A beat rose, unified, improbable. Torches swayed. Voices joined, low humming that found shared rhythm. Under the green streamers of the aurora, a new song took shape, and Jon felt the first chords of a kingdom pulse through the frozen ground beneath his feet. The next weeks were a forge. Councils bled into dawn, translated across tongues. Scribes, few, but precious, scratched charcoal on scraped hides, shaping the bones of a code they would call the Hearth Law. It established circles, rings of 10, of 100, of 1,000, each choosing a speaker. Trade forums replaced raids. Quarrels settled before a triad of judges drawn from wolf, horse, and spear. Jon moved among tents, hearing grievances, soothing flares of rage with promises, backing promises with his own labor. He hunted, hauled ice blocks for shelters, stood sentry while others slept. Sleep became rationed, an hour snatched here or there. Ghosts prowled at his heels, sentinel as tireless as winter wind. One dawn, as pale light seeped across camp, Jon found Vihana watching the building of a long hall. Logs dragged, latticed, chinked with moss and snow. Children perched along rafters, tying rawhide lashings. Free folk and Dothraki labored side by side. He offered her a strip of smoked venison. She accepted, chewing thoughtfully. "This not kingdom," she said, jerking her chin toward the hall. "It grows like sapling. Saplings break in storm." "Unless the roots intertwine," Jon answered. "Then they hold stronger." She swallowed, eyes narrowing. "Dothraki follow strength, not roots." Jon nodded. "Strength will come, but first, roots." He gestured to a stone ring taking shape near the long hall. Inside, a smith of Wintertown hammered a shard of black rock. Obsidian, dragged from Dragonstow's ruins, into a blade. A Dothraki metalworker tempered the edge with oil, their motions mirroring, each learning the Uder's craft. Sparks flew bright against the dawn. "See?" Jon said. "What?" "Strength forging itself." Bayana's lips curved, almost a smile. Letters arrived from the south on raven wings. One bore Sansa Stark's sigil. She wrote of bannermen uneasy with rumors. Wildlings massing, Dothraki marauders free in the northern wastes, Jon Snow raising armies beyond the wall. She urged caution, asked his intent. Jon penned reply after reply, each crumpled. How to express something not yet born. He settled on 7 lines, simple and stark. "I seek peace, not war. Trust that I remember home. When the thaw comes, we will meet. Until then, send grain if you can spare." Another letter bore the crowned raven seal of King Bran the Broken. It contained only a single sentence. "The loom holds firm, but new threads fray old patterns. Keep weaving, brother." Jon folded that one and tucked it into his jerkin over his heart. Spring rode in on brittle hooves. Icicles dripped, snows receded, exposing sodden earth. Grass glimmered at river edges, pale and tentative. With ice release came new trials, floodwaters, sickness from thawing rot. A plague of biting flies hatched too soon. The council dispatched healers, maester's apprentices from Molestown who had fled debts, free folk herb wives, Dothraki bone readers. Under canvas infirmaries they traded poultices, boiled water, shared methodology, sometimes clashed over superstition. But the dying decreased. As fever ebbed, hope steadied. Herds fattened on emerging moss. Scouts returned with news of mammoth near the frozen shore, their numbers healthy. Dothraki eyes shone at the thought of meat so vast. Expeditions formed. Riders on shaggy garons paired with spearwives carrying nets and obsidian-tipped lances. Jon led the first hunt, the ground thundering beneath the mammoth's charge, culminating in a triumphant kill that fed 3 circles for a moon. Celebration followed. Fires dotted the valley like rival constellations. Dothraki danced, bells chiming. Free folk drums answered, Wintertown fiddlers unwound jigs, long unheard in holdfast halls. John walked amid laughter, a stranger among friends, feeling the weight of watching lessen moment by moment. He allowed himself, for a breath, to belong. Then a horn sounded, low, mournful, from the western ridge. Silence fell. Joan's hand found Longclaw by reflex. A scout galloped into camp, horse lathered, cloak soaked with spray. He slid from the saddle on numb legs, breath ragged. "Ships!" he gasped, voice broken by cold. Black sails on the shivering sea, ironborn. A ripple of dread coursed through the crowd. Ironborn reavers, raiders of life and limb. Rumors spoke of their new lord, merciless, hungry for plunder after years of uneasy peace. They'd found the nascent kingdom at world's edge, ripe for pillage. John lifted his eyes to the horizon. Dawn's first blush-tinged cloud bellies crimson. He felt again Bran's words. Armies are born of hunger. He turned to those gathered. Free folk, Dothraki Northlanders, and saw fear, but also a spark of fierce resolve. These were people who had survived storms, hunger, dragons, and ghosts. They would not break now. "We built this hearth together," John declared, voice low yet thrumming like the horn that had sounded. "We stand guard together. Saddle horses, string bows, sharpened spears. Tonight we defend the story we write." Tormund's laughter boomed. "Ay, let the krakens taste wild snow." Vayana swung onto her stallion, bells singing in her braid. "Horse and wolf," she called. "We ride as one." Cheers erupted. A conflagration of voices. Ghost howled, the sound echoing off ridges and rushing river. John felt the kingdom pulse. No crown, no throne, but a heartbeat fierce as any. And he knew, cleaving through dread, that the hour of proof had come. As preparations surged, he climbed the ridge. Wind tore at his cloak. Far over the gray waves, black sails crawled against the pale horizon, their masts spines of leviathans eager for feast. John closed his eyes, steadied his breath, and spoke to the storm inside him. "Let them come," he whispered. Behind him, drums rose, hoofbeats thundered, and the fledgling realm readied its teeth. Wind swept over the ridge in restless gusts, flinging needles of salt-stung snow against John's face as he stared down the long slope toward the gray sheet of the shivering sea. 20 half-finished watchtowers bristled along the bluffs below him, each fashioned from river pine lashed with rawhide, each thrumming with the noise of saws, hammers, and the hoarse voices of men and women learning, sometimes reluctantly, how to build a wall that was not meant to keep them out. Smoke rose from charcoal pits, where free folk smiths and Wintertown tinkers labored side by side, drawing red-hot iron from scavenged anchors and shattered cart axles. Sparks drifted skyward like frantic fireflies, carried away on the same wind that rattled the tower frames and made their raw timbers groan. Farther downslope, on the narrow strand where scoured rock met churning surf, Dothraki horsemen drilled in tight circles, spears leveled inward, outward, inward again, the rhythm of their hooves pounding counterpoint to the hewing axes above. They had never been comfortable so close to water. The sea was the poisoned river, the foe of horses, but necessity had bred something stronger than loathing. From that same angry water would soon burst longships flying black banners, and every rider understood the taste of pillage all too well. If iron-born reavers reached the sprawl of tents and rough halls behind the ridge, they would find an abundance of plunder and flesh. The riders' fear had therefore become flint, and the sparks it struck lit resolve rather than panic. John lowered the brass dog-glass Bran had sent north in a courier's satchel, light enough to fold, slim enough to stow in a saddlebag, and ran a gloved thumb over the hinge until it snapped shut. No sails on the morning horizon, only a thin smear of mist hugging the water. Still, the scout's report could not be ignored. He turned, signaling to Val, who stood nearby with a slate-gray direwolf pelt wrapped high at her throat. "They're taking shape," she said, chin angling toward the towers. "Another day, maybe 2, before the top platforms tie in. If the Ironborn come before then, The watch will be blind after dark. Nina. Blind men learn to listen harder, Jon replied. But he shared her concern. We'll fire pitchpots at dusk and keep them burning through the night. Even a half-built tower can serve as a beacon. Val's pale eyes flicked over the frozen waves, narrowing. Fire draws moths. And friendlies, he answered. Our lookouts need to know where shore ends and camp begins. A hint of a smile tugged at her mouth. Grim but genuine. I'll set the children gathering pine knot. It blazes hotter than seal oil. Jon nodded, grateful for her practicality, then started down the slope, boots sending drifts of powder sliding after him. The climb to the ridge had left his thighs aching beneath boiled leather greaves, yet the descent felt heavier still. Every step carried the weight of decisions he could not delay. Supplies, logistics, scouts, morale, tiny stones that together became an avalanche he could neither outrun nor ignore. 5,000 souls now called his ragged hearth home. Half of them born beyond the wall. A third dreamed into being on grass fields a world away. The rest gathered like wind-blown seed from Wintertown, Deepwood Mott, even a scattering from White Harbor and the Rills. 5,000 mouths, 5,000 hungers, 5,000 small griefs. They would not march at his order alone. They required sake song, a vision they could feel quicken in their own blood. And now they required defense. Ghost padded downslope beside him. Paws, silent, on crusted snow. The direwolf's red eyes tracked gulls spiraling above the surf. But his ears turned again and again toward the distant clamor of axes. Ghost liked the shore no more than the Dothraki did. Yet he remained, bound by a loyalty older than kingdoms. Halfway to the strand, Jon met Tormund Giantsbane and Vihayana, striding uphill with a dozen riders at their backs. Tormund's cheeks were raw from the salt wind, copper beard frozen stiff at the edges. Vihayana had traded her city-pillaged silk for layered leathers and a cloak of dyed oxhide, the bells in her braid muffled with wool strips to keep them from chiming at inopportune moments. She carried a recurved bow freshly strung with mammoth gut sinew, the tips carved to resemble twin horse heads. Riders tested the shore break. She said without greeting, "Horses sink to the knee where ice melts. Bad footing for a charge." Jon's gaze drifted to the rutted wash, where waves slapped sludge-colored sand. "Then we dismount," he answered. "Line the bluff with archers. Harass them as they land." Tormund spat a frozen clump of beard onto the snow. "Harrog's lads won't anchor if arrows darken the sky. They'll raid smaller camps up coast and vanish before we trudge there. Which is why we finished the watchtowers," Jon said, voice low but firm. "Torches on the ridge can warn every village along the coast. If the Ironborn scatter their strikes, word will still run ahead of them. And if the bastards beach a league north under cover of night." Tormund folded tree-trunk arms. "Torches don't shine round corners." A sudden memory flashed. Black sails off Hardhome, whites pouring into the surf, the sickening crunch of ribs as living flesh met dead strength. Different foe, different shore, same taste of dread. Yet this time they were not scrambling refugees. They had time, numbers, purpose. Jon swallowed. "Then we draw them where we want them." He turned to Vihayana. "Your riders, how many bows strong?" 120, she said. "More soon." "And can they feign retreat?" Her smile was all sharp teeth. "We are Dothraki, Snow Wolf. Retreat is the first half of the charge." "No." Jon allowed himself a thin, answering smile. "Good. If the Reavers land north, ride near enough to tempt them, then fall back toward the towers. Make them think the camp half deserted." Tormund grunted approval. Ironborn love a chase, especially one ending in pillage. "They'll follow," Jon agreed, "and find sharpened stakes where they expect soft underbelly. Once footed in shallow snow, they'll fight like half-drowned crabs." Vihayana twirled her bow, pleased. "Horses will circle and strike. Wolf folk press the front. Steel bites from two mouths." "Then not a horse you." "Three," Tormund corrected, patting the haft of his great axe. "Don't forget the giant's bane." "And 4," came a quiet voice behind them. They turned to see Arnulf, a Wintertown stonemason whose limp had kept him from longer hunts. He leaned on a spear half again his height, the point shaped from glacier glass Jones folk had mined at the ice rivers. I've 50 fisherfolk, shaping caltrops from walrus tusk, scatter them in the shallows. Reaver feet meet more than snow. John felt a swell of pride so fierce it almost hurt. See Bran eyes in the Raven Hall about placement, he said. Chart tides, currents. If your tusk teeth wash away, we'll be the ones bleeding when we wade in after them. Arnulf dipped his head, satisfied, then trudged toward the watchtowers with his spear clicking against crampons strapped beneath worn boots. Vaiana's riders wheeled away, voices trilling as they galloped back to drills. Tormund stayed, scanning the sea. You play a dangerous game, Crow. It's always dangerous near the edge of the world, John answered. But we make the edge ours or see it swallow us. Tormund studied him for a long beat, then clapped Jon's shoulder hard enough to jar his teeth. I followed worse madmen. You need me. Blow the horn thrice. I'll come faster than a drunk to a warm bed. With that he stomped off, bellowing for tools and tree cutters. Left alone but for Ghost, John released a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Choices balanced on blades. Every plan hid 1,000 fractures. But motion itself forged unity. Idle hands turned to doubt. Busy ones found common pulse. Above him, workers hammered crossbeams, and each strike echoed like a heartbeat. The sun rode low by the time he returned to the long hall called Hearthstone. Its roof of caribou hide stretched over a bent timber frame big enough to seat 300. Smoke leaked through a gapstone chimney, scented with juniper and fatty mammoth. Inside, lamplight flickered against piled shields and spears stacked neat alongside walls. A council waited, seated around a table cobbled from ship hatches and fitted with rough-hewn benches. Val greeted him with a nod. Beside her sat Magd Moleskin, the gray-haired free-folk midwife whose voice could silence children at 50 paces. To Magd's flank was Willa Birchbark, a Wintertown woman whose trade lay in scribbles inked onto scraped vellum. Viana occupied the opposite side, one arm draped over the shoulder of Rook, a wiry Dothraki youth who translated when her Westerosi faltered. At the table's head perched Bran Eyes and the Raven, the maester-trained scout with parchment skin and quills sprouting from every pocket. He fingered a rolled hide dotted with tide marks. John took the empty seat Bran had reserved. Willa dipped a quill in lampblack. We convene this hearth ring in the Wolf's Hour, she intoned, reciting the hearth law they'd sworn to several moons prior. Matters pressing the ring? Pressing, John said. Ironborn sightings south of Skagos, confirmed by 2 ravens and 1 living scout. Arrivals may come with tonight's tide or the next. We finalize defenses now. Bran unrolled his hide to reveal a charcoal map of slanted shorelines and depth marks. 3 likely landing coves, he said, tapping with a whalebone pointer. Here, where kelp beds break surf. Here, where headlands hide approach. And here at Dunsable, a shingle strong enough for longships to drag keel if storms brew. His thin finger paused on the last. If I steered raiders, I'd take Dunsable. Sheltered, close to game trails, a spring for water. Mag Moleskin grunted. Then we put our teeth there. Not all, John said. We'll let them think Dunsable's safe. Rider scouts on bluffs will allow the first keels to scrape. Once decks empty, we strike from 2 sides. Stakes in sand, caltrops in shallows, archers on cliffs. We push them back into their own surf. One. Val tugged her braid. And any ships that slip south? Fire rafts. Wait upriver, John said. We'll loose them on the outgoing tide. If their hulls burn, their courage followed. Discussion spiraled into minutiae. Signal drums, the placement of healers, the allotment of salt pork for the night watch. Willa scratched notes while Bran's pointer hopped like a sparrow. Vaiana argued for cavalry charges across higher ground. Magd reminded her riders that horse legs break on hidden rock. They compromised. Riders would harry the flanks, dismount near the cliffs, and fight on foot once the archers' first volleys flew. The council's susurrus began to blur. John realized weariness weighed his limbs thicker than his wool-lined gambeson. He'd slept 3 hours in the last 30. Yet his mind remained razor-bright. Each beat of the meeting carving new shapes into a plan he could almost see rising around him. A tapestry of resolve, woven from disparate threads. When final details were set, Willa recited them back word for word. Each speaker nodded assent. She sealed the minutes with a thumbprint in soot and fat, then tucked the page into her bark-bound ledger. Jon pushed back his bench. See your people fed, then prepare them. Night will be long. Chairs scraped, voices muted, and soon he was alone save for Ghost lying by the hearth. Flames licked caribou fat along the logs, popping pine knots. Jon let eyes close a moment, but rest would not root. Visions flickered behind lids, black sails, arrow flights, torches guttering in sleet. When he blinked them away, he noticed Willa had left a folded parchment beside his cup. He opened it to Sansa's neat hand. Grain wagons departed Molestown yesterday, escorted by 24 archers loyal to House Flint. They will reach the gift within the fortnight. Famine lurks even here, little brother Dot. May your fires burn bright enough for both our hearths. Under her signature, she had drawn a tiny direwolf, as she used to on notes slid beneath his door at Winterfell when they were children, squabbling, and then making peace. For the span of a breath he smelled wood smoke drifting over the Winterfell Bailey, heard Robb's laughter, Arya's indignant shouts, the clang of dull training swords. That you will eat all. But the memory fled, torn free by the howl of a lookout's horn slicing the night outside. One note, two, then a third, so high it quavered like ice under heavy boot. 3 blasts. Danger close. Jon leapt, Ghost already bounding through the hall's doorway. Outside, the blue dusk had thickened to near night, clouds blotting stars. Lanterns bobbed along the ridge. He sprinted uphill, snow flying beneath heel, breath sharp ribbon in the cold. As he crested the top, he saw shapes moving on the water. Silent, dark slivers sliding into the cove Bran had marked. Longships. At least a dozen. The Ironborn had come sooner than even Bran's tides predicted. He grabbed the horn from the lookout and blew a single long note. The rally call. From the camp below, drums answered, deep and urgent. Firepots atop half-finished towers roared as pitch ignited, bathing the ridge in orange. Arrows rattled in quivers. Spear points glimmered wetly. Dothraki riders mounted with frantic efficiency, their horses snorting plumes into the dark. Behind Jon, Tormund's great bulk pounded up the incline. Bloody bastards love moonless sails, he growled. They choose dark, we give them flame. Jon pointed to the tallest, sturdiest tower. Signal Bran to light the north chain. All of it. Tormund vanished down slope bellowing. Val reached Jon's side carrying a bundle of leather strips laced with vials of wildfire Jean's Saltwife had brewed from ancient Meereenese formulae. The colorless liquid sloshed faintly green. For gifts you can't return, she said, handing him half. Jon strapped them across his chest. One nick in the shirt beneath would burst into emerald hunger, yet this was no night for timid blades. He signaled Arcus of the Knotted Tree clan, who hustled 10 bowmen onto the cliff's edge. Wait for my mark, Jon told him. Use the red-fletched first. Aim for the mast spans. Down on the strand. Figures leapt from prows to foaming surf. Moonlight glinted off mail like patchwork fish scales. The Ironborn moved with seawolf confidence. Shields raised against expected arrows that had not yet flown. They advanced into shallows only ankle deep, where low tide had bared the sandbank. A war horn blasted among them, 2 notes. Rear oarsmen began dragging the longships farther onto the beach. Jon lifted his hand. Arcus knocked a red-feathered shaft, drew, and loosed. The arrow arced, flame spitting from the pitch-dipped head, striking the center mast of the lead longship just below the sail ring. For a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the flame licked upward, catching tarred hemp. With a muffled whoosh, the sail erupted in a bloom of fire so bright, it painted every helm and shield blood orange. Ironborn cursed. Some stumbled back into surf. Others raised axes, roaring challenge. 2 more red-fletched arrows streaked down, embedding in the second ship's beak. Another gout of flame. Jon signaled again, and riders burst from the left flank, hooves beating frozen turf. They thundered parallel to the waterline, releasing arrows on the run, slender shafts tipped with obsidian, poisoned with winterbane. Ironborn shields lifted, but Dothraki aim found seams. Necks, groins, armpits. Reavers dropped, teeth chattering as numbing toxin flooded limbs. Horses veered away before axes could hamstring them. On the ridges right, free folk warriors launched stones from leather slings, the air alive with buzzing. One stone clapped a helm so hard the man spun, dropped face down into knee-deep brine. Waves rolled him limp. Jon motioned Val forward. She sprinted, hurled a wildfire vial at the prow of the third longship, then dove aside. The glass shattered on wet plank. Green flame erupted, crawling hungrily along the rail, hissing where seawater tried to smother it. Ironborns scrambled, some tumbling over the far side into dark water. A war horn bellowed anew, different pitch, urgent. From behind the first line of ships, another squadron appeared, sails still furled, oars feathering silent wake. They had skirted the southern headland, using deeper channel to avoid watchfire glare. Their prows were armored with iron rams shaped like kraken beaks. Jon's stomach clenched. He cupped hands around mouth. Archers. New target. Before they could adjust, the rearmost longship unleashed a volley of heavy crossbow bolts. One thumped into the pine rail beside Arcus, splintering wood. Another found a tower support rope. Snap. Dot dot. The half-finished platform sagged, spilling 2 pitch torches. Flames whooshed as oil splattered, momentarily blinding the men below. Through the glare, Jon glimpsed a figure at the prow of the lead, reinforcing ship. Tall, broad, clad in scalloped iron scale darkened with ash. A black-horned helm sat upon his head, the faceplate wrought as snarling kraken. He wielded a 2-handed axe, with moon-silvered blade, etched in twisting runes. Jon recognized him from Asha Greyjoy's tales during the war councils of Dragonstone. Harag of Old Wick, called Shatterbones. A loner even among reavers, rumored to carve the names of those he killed into his own flesh. Harag's ship grounded hard. He leapt over the prow into waist-deep surf, water exploding around him. Dozens followed. They advanced toward the burning longships without pause, disciplined in their brutality. Jon drew long claw. "Spears to me," he shouted. Free folk brandished pikes, scavenged from Carhold armories, taking position along a shallow ridge of dune. Dothraki dismounted behind them, bows switched for curved arrows, eyes gleaming like predators, tasting fresh blood. Val unslung a short spear from her back. Iron met ice as the first ranks collided. The clangor drowned crashing waves. Harag swung his axe in a brutal wheel, cleaving a pike haft, then opening the throats of 2 spearmen in a single backstroke. Blood sprayed steaming onto snow. Free folk stepped back, regrouped, lunged again. Dothraki riders vaulted the dune, lashes whistling across reaver helmets, dragging men back into furious blades. Jon crashed into the thick where shields pressed shields. Long claw bit through mail as though it were boiled leather. Valyrian steel singing a hollow music. Each enemy's face blurred into the next, snarls, grimaces, the wide-eyed finality of astonishment when blade slides easier than flesh ought to permit. Steel slipped, blood slicked guard. Ghost appeared like white lighting, jaws crushing a reaver's calf, toppling him into surf. Teeth flashed again at the throat. Arrows hissed overhead. On either side, wildfire drank hulls until even wave wash could not quench it. Burning masts toppled, spewing embers like fiery rain. Through the maelstrom, Jon glimpsed Harag hewing a path toward the dune crest. The kraken-helmed giant moved with the inevitability of tide. He swatted axes aside, kicked a Dothraki to the ground, stomped her chest until ribs cracked, and kept climbing. Jon broke from melee, panting, snow crusting in his beard. He caught up at the ridgeline. Harag's head turned. The helm's eyes glowed dull red from reflected flame. The Ironborn raised his axe slowly in both hands, presenting the weapon as one might a lover for inspection. "I know that sword," he rasped through helm slits. "Snow's bastard blade. A song of traitors." Jon lifted long claw in salute. Better traitor than reaver. No. Hareg's voice carried the hush of deep water. Trader forgets root, forsakes salt. Reaver remembers only tide. He lunged. Axe descended like a wager placed on bone. Jon sidestepped on instinct, honed in courtyard duels with Robb and Arya, raised Longclaw to parry. Steel rang out. The shock rippled up his elbows, nearly numbing hands inside wet gloves. Hareg reversed grip, pulled blade low toward Jon's knee. Jon hopped clear. Snow sprang. They circled, each aware of peripheral battle, yet shuddered to single-minded intent. Ghost paced the perimeter until grasping hands tried to seize his tail. He ripped throats instead. Hareg feinted high, then chopped horizontal. Jon ducked beneath, pivoted inside the arc. Shoulder almost brushing Reaver's breastplate. He thrust upward, aiming armpit gap. Hareg twisted, the point scraping plate, with shrill protest. A mailed elbow cracked against Jon's cheek, lights bursting behind his eyes. He staggered, footing slipping on a mix of snow, sand, and blood. A fresh wave crashed, drenching them both. The Reaver bellowed something in Old Tongue. Curse or prayer. He raised the axe for a killing strike. Jon rolled sideways. Axe buried into frozen sand with a thud. Before Hareg could wrench it free, Jon slashed across the haft. Valyrian steel parted seasoned oak like cheesecloth. The axe head fell, hissing as salt water met hot iron. Hareg stared, momentarily stunned. Jon lunged, pommel punching into helmeted faceplate. The Reaver stumbled. Jon followed, ramming shoulder to chest. They went down in a tangle onto the wet flat where wavelets licked shin high. Hareg clawed at belt, drawing a dagger saw-tooth like shark jaw. Jon pinned his wrist, their grip soaked in blackening surf. Fight ends, Jon gasped. Not while salt remains, Hareg snarled back. Spittle mixing with sea spray died. He jerked his head forward, helm horns catching Jon's brow. Pain blossomed, warmth coursed into one eye. Jon slammed Hareg's dagger hand onto a tidal rock, heard bone meet stone. Hareg roared but held knife. Wave surge rolled them. Selene blinded Jon's left eye red. He blinked, saw only blur. So he let go Hareg's wrist, seized the dagger hilt itself, and twisted. The Ironborn's grip slipped. Jon tore the blade free and drove it into the undergap of helm. Below ear, angled upward. Metal screeched on metal, then found flesh. The roaring stopped. Hareg convulsed, blood frothing around helm edges, limbs thrashing underwater. Jon rolled off, heart stuttering, gulping icy air. Ghost dragged a wounded Reaver away nearby. Arrows still hissed. Torches still burned. New horns sounded. 3 sharp bursts. The recall. Ironborn lines shattered. Those not dead or captured fled for remaining undamaged longships, only to find many ablaze, black fumes writhing into night. Panic dissolved their formation. Some leapt into water to swim toward outer ships, still afloat. The sea accepted toll. Jon dragged himself upright. Barracks of pain lined every muscle. The Reaver commander's body floated face down, helm horns bobbing like broken spars. Jon turned away, dizzy. Val appeared, blood-splattered spear in hand. "We hold," she said, eyes searching his cut brow. She pressed linen there, binding quickly. "Casualties?" Jon asked. 2 score down, she breathed. "More hurt. But the tide turns red for them too." She pointed seaward where burning hulks drifted, illumination casting grotesque silhouettes of swimming Reavers. He inhaled smoke-laced night. "Sound the gather. Take wounded rear. Strip prisoners, bind them. And those who surrender." Jon wiped gore from Longclaw on a fallen banner. "Offer Winter's choice, work or the walk. Let them decide." "No." Val nodded, understanding that meant labor in ice quarries or exile into wastes with no blade. Horse bells jingled, Vihana reined up, cloak torn, cheek smeared with soot. "Ships break, wolves feast," she said, voice shaking not from fear but exhaustion. Jon offered a tired smile. "Riders turned tide. Wolf steel broke bones," she countered, then lifted a horn carved from aurochs. "Blue wad." Across the strand riders echoed, raising cheer. But the night was not yet done. Bran Eyes and the Ravens sprinted from the ridge, breathless. Second sail group, he panted, pointing southeast. 5. Maybe 6. Beyond headland, they hold off, waiting. Jon's relief cooled. Of course, Harag was not fool enough to commit all teeth at once. This assault had been probing, meant to measure defenses. Reform lines, Jon ordered. Gather arrows, salvage shields. Tormund holds North Ridge. Riders patrol south in threes. Keep torches guarded. If they douse our light, we're blind. Val and Vihayana peeled away, shouting orders. Jon limped to where healers triaged, Ghost shadowed. Under lamplight, wounded lay on hides. A Dothraki girl of perhaps 15 clutched a stump where hand had been. A free folk boy recited a prayer while Maester's apprentice stitched thigh gash. Jon knelt beside a mortally struck man he recognized as Roff Flint, one of Sansa's escort archers. Roff's lungs wheezed through a puncture. "My sister," he whispered. "Mole's town, tell her I flew." "You will tell her yourself," Jon said, though he doubted it. He pressed cloth to wound until healer came. Hours dragged. Tide turned, carrying wrecks seaward. Scouts reported the remaining longships loitering out of bow range, massed skeletal against star-stained sky. Fires on shore dwindled to embers. Exhausted defenders slumped behind makeshift barricades, weapons laid across laps. Every sound felt amplified. The hiss of cooling ember. The uneven breathing of men who dared not sleep. Before dawn's first ghost light bled the horizon, iron bells clanged faintly from water's edge. Jon rose. A single longship, sail furled, drifted toward shore under oar. No flag of parley, no shield raised high. Instead, a corpse hung cruciform from the mast, lashed with anchor chain. Even in dim light, Jon could see runes carved into the dead man's chest. Old Wyke prayer script. "We slit his throat while he begged," shouted a voice from the prow. "He died naming you false king?" Jon stepped beyond barricade. Hands empty, fatigued to the marrow, yet alert. "You waste men and wood," he called back. Turned south and live. Derisive laughter. "South is done with us. We want no farmers' plots. We want what you hoard. Blood-warmed iron, woman thralls, the white beast's pelt." Ghost bared teeth. Jon called, "Come take them then. See what price the sea demands." A spear arced from the longship toward him but fell short, tangling in surf. The ship pivoted, oars digging, retreating. From the deck, someone tossed an oil cask that burst aflame, leaving slick fire dancing atop waves. Tormund arrived, hair smoking where he'd ovened himself too near blaze. "Their courage sours quicker than goat's milk. But they'll be back. They wanted to measure our night eyes," Jon answered. "Now they know we carry wildfire in cliffs." Tormund grunted. "Best measure to keep them guessing then. We push salvage hulls into channel, block their approach." "Now," Jon nodded. "Work begins after dawn. But first, rest. Rotate half the watch, the other half sleep. We'll need every arm soon." He trudged away, searching for a patch of snow free of blood. Ghost nosed a spot beside a broken shield. Jon collapsed, back against shield, eyes heavy. Dawn peeled the sky pink. He closed his lids, welcoming brief dark. Sleep came shallow and dreamless. When touch shook him awake, the sun hovered a spear's length above ridgeline. The air smelled of char and brine. Arnulf stood over him, holding a black shard of obsidian. "You're called to council," he said. "News from inland." Jon rose. Spine crackled. He followed Arnulf to Hearthstone, where survivors of the night's first battle gathered. Willa's ledger lay open. Val, Vehana, Bran, Tormund crowded the table. Beside them stood a stranger in grey maester robes, silver links glinting at throat. He bowed. "Maester Warwick, Castle Black. I rode south at Raven's behest." His gaze flicked over the council. Night's Watch survivors bring word. Wildfires spotted along the King's Road. Raiders wearing Kraken sigils attacked supply lines from Winterfell. Lady Sansa diverted grain wagons east to Carhold, but losses mount to tie. "Then?" John gripped table edge. Herrick's kin strike deeper than coast. Indeed, Warwick said. Ironborn move inland by river craft, then raid. He unrolled parchment, rough sketches of waterways crossing the gift. If they sever roads, your hearth starves. Seeds won't germinate through iron boot. Silence settled like dust. Torment broke it. So we gut their belly here, on the shore, before their raiding lines fill with trophies. John tapped the tide map. One battle isn't enough. We must take the fight to their ships. Board, burn, sink at anchor. Vayana's eyes lit with feral delight. Riders on sea, she said. New dance. Val measured Joan's face. You mean to attack before they regroup? Nightfall, John confirmed. We outfit our sturdiest fishing skiffs with shield walls, man them with mixed crews. Row out from North Inlet while wildfire rafts drift south on ebb tide. Trap their remaining longships between flame and our blades. Brand's quills rustled as he leaned forward. The risk, if winds change, fire could swallow our boats. Then we watch the sky, John said. And we pray to whatever gods still trouble themselves with men. Preparations resumed. Free folk caulked seams with tar. Dothraki tied horse skins into water sacks for buoyancy. Wintertown fishers rigged makeshift rudders. Healers ground willow bark to stanch breaks and bruises yet unmade. Every spare strip of cloth became bandage. Every empty cask, a float for wildfire. John walked wharf to wharf, offering words of thanks, noting fear in eyes, and answering with his own steadiness. When dusk stained western clouds umber, 20 craft slid oat slow into tidal flow, their sides painted with pitch to darken them. Each boat bore a mastless stub staff where a lamp could be raised, then snuffed. Crews crouched low, oars muffled. John chose the prow seat. On the largest, Ghost curled between benches. Red eyes, luminous. Val commanded another vessel. Tormund another. Vayana's Dothraki took 3. Arrows knocked even on water. Maester Warwick stayed ashore, tasked with beacon signals should disaster loom. A hush blanketed the inlet as they glided toward open water. Above, aurora flickered, shimmering ribbons painting the sea in eerie jade. Oars dipped, rose, dripping. Somewhere, an oarsman hummed a cradle song. The man beside him murmured in Dothraki, until both melodies twined, became one. Half a league out, Brand's beacon flared on cliff. That was the sign. Current slack, wind east by north. Safe enough. John raised palm. Torches were dunked into pitch, then lit with flint. Fingers of orange danced just above waves. Further south, a loose chain of rafts drifted, each bearing clay jars of wildfire stacked beneath damp sealhide that would burn off once flame caught. Fog thickened, gift of warming sea meeting, cold night. Their boats vanished into it like specters. Only the glow of raft flames marked progress, sliding southward. John felt the moment rather than saw it. Mass ahead, a dark forest of masts looming through vapor. The Ironborn lay at anchor behind a spit of rock, trusting night and early victory for cover. Silent signals passed. Halt, ready grapnels, arrows. Fog swirled, parted, revealing hulls striped with soot from prior flame. Some men on deck paced, silhouettes faint in dim lantern glow. Others slept. John lifted his arm and swung it down. Oars dipped, boats surged. Grapnels sailed, metal clanged on gunwales. Joan's craft kissed hull with hollow thud. He hooked rope, swung onto deck, Ghost bounding after. Catching feet on planks, John slashed upward, cutting a drowsy lookout before the man's cry finished. Dothraki spilled from shadows, blades flashing silver-black dot. Free folk roared, axes hacking mooring lines to set ship adrift toward awaiting rafts of flickering fire. Alarm rose, but confusion reigned. Ironborn stumbled from hammocks half-armed. John cut through them, seeking the powder hold. He found barrels beneath stair, smashed heads with axe borrowed en route, spilled lamp oil, then tossed a torch. Flame whooshed, hungry. Overhead, Another ship erupted as Wild-Eye Val set fire to sail rigging. The glow painted the fog hellish. Howls. Sprinting feet. Splash of bodies leaping overboard. Jon re-emerged topside. Ironborn captain, lean and scarred, lunged with cutlass. Jon parried, riposted through belly, ending contest. He clambered across deck, now tilting as hull caught and flame chewed lines. Ghost carved a path to rail. Together they leapt back to their skiff, oarsmen hauling aboard. All around, Infernos blossomed. Flame reflected on waves like molten coins. Reavers fought, died, or dove. Some longships, sails still furled, drifted into wildfire rafts. Green tongues licked, shrieked, turned wood to pyre. Amid chaos, 3 ironborn vessels cut twisted anchor ropes. Oars churning frantic to escape North Channel. Jon shouted to Vihayana's skiff. Riders gave chase, arrows raining. But current favored fugitives. Let them flee. Tormund bellowed from his blazing prize. Beard aflame until he slapped it out. They'll carry tales of burning sea. Jon ordered withdrawal. Boats regrouped to tow survivors, friends and foes alike. The flotilla retreated into fog, leaving behind an angry orange sunrise bathing wreckage. Dawn proper came muted, sky hazed by lingering smoke. Along shore, healers tended new burns, new cuts. Prisoner knots lengthened. Maester Warwick tallied, ledger lines stark. Of 20 boats, 2 lost crew casualties under 50. Ironborn dead exceeded 200. Prisoners 73. Herrig's body washed ashore mid-morn. Axe stump clutched in rigid fingers. Jon ordered burial in cairn of unmarked stones, denying him the ocean he worshipped. Food stores remained intact. Grain wagons from Winterfell arrived battered but present, escorted now by flint bowmen, doubled in number after night. Ravens told of northern defense. Sansa's note that accompanied wagons bore no scolding, only 3 words: hold the line. Women sang as they unpacked flour. Children chased each other round charred hull timbers that would become watchtower braces. Dothraki riders gathered driftwood to craft new bows. Free folk fletched arrows, humming wolf songs. Even wounded found tasks: stitching sails, sharpening hooks, grinding ice for poultices. Jon watched, heart heavy yet lifted. They had bled together, and bled Ironborn for it. But war seldom ended in one night. River routes inland still hosted Kraken banners. Harreg's death might spawn vengeance. He climbed the tallest completed tower by afternoon. Wind whipped cloak as he scanned horizon through Bran's dogglass. No sails yet, only gulls circling carcasses. Inland, smoke from cook fires rose peaceful. Footsteps on ladder. Vihaina joined, offering 2 tin cups of pine needle tea. They drank in silence until she said, "Riders speak of you as Cal who walks on water." He snorted. "I sank often enough tonight." "Still lived." She sipped. "Dothraki respect strength. Free folk respect freedom. Northmen, honor. You give all 3. Napin." Jon looked down at the camp where wolves and horses mingled at watering trough. "I give what I can. I fail as much. Yet you stand." She touched pommel of Longclaw at his hip. "These word sings loudest when wielded by heart that doubts. Doubt tests edge." He considered that, then nodded. Below, children's laughter drifted. Snow melted in thin rivulets off blackened timbers, carrying ash into soil. From that soil, come spring, they would coax barley, tubers, greens unknown to Dothraki tongues, but soon woven into stew and story. Val ascended, hair loose, cheeks wind-pinched. Scouts sighted survivors trudging north of Greypoint, maybe 60. They slug west toward coast again. Tormund takes 200 to intercept. Jon trusted Tormund's instincts. Ironborn would find the old raider more wolf than man. "Send runners with him," he said. "If prisoners surrender, bind them, spare them. We need not sow hatred deeper." Val nodded. Mercy's blade cuts both ways. They stood together atop the tower as sun slid behind slate clouds and the day bled into pale gold. On the distant sea, floating embers still glowed like fallen stars. No sails marked horizon. For now, their hearth held. Yet Joan's mind drifted south to river routes and kraken banners left unburnt. The loom brand spoke of tugged at him still. Ironborn were threads, but others lay unseen. Sword captains seizing marine, new slavers grown bold, iron-throne politics curdling. And there were whispers in Raven's margins of strange sails far west, of dragons' shadows where none should fly. He set cup down, gloved fingers curling on cold rail. "We won a night," he murmured. "Tomorrow asks its own price." Beside him, Ghost raised muzzle, red eyes reflecting last flicker of burning ships. He howled. A long, low note that rolled across ridge and sea, neither triumph nor lament, but something older, a promise that winter might hush, storms might rage, foes might gather, yet the wolf would stand watch still. The howl faded. Jon breathed deep of salted wind, tasted smoke and pine, and allowed the weight of the realm he forged to rest upon his shoulders, not crushing but fitting, as a cloak chosen rather than bestowed. Night gathered once more, and with it, the slow making of a kingdom woven fang by fang, hoof by hoof, heart by heart, against the edge of all the world. Inandja. The wind turned restless as night deepened, the surf's ceaseless whispering climbing to a low roar beyond the charred hulks and broken timbers scattered along the strand. Jon's people were sleepless with exhaustion, a strange contradiction. The long tension of waiting for war had snapped. But victory brought no peace, only new aches, fresh duties, the bitter aftertaste of death. Lanterns burned through the dusk, blue and green and gold, painting swaying shadows across snow that was now stained by old blood and newer ashes. The war camp no longer felt like a siege. It felt for the first time like the beginning of a settlement, as if the embers of survival had finally started to catch in the wild kindling of the north. Jon walked alone between the scattered shelters, boots crunching ice, hand resting on Longclaw's pommel. His face still throbbed from Harrog's helm horns, and blood had dried along his jaw, making the skin tight, brittle. He ignored the pain. There was always another pain waiting. The wounded were tended in a large tent near the fire pit, where healers worked by guttering tallow lamps, their hands quick with stitches and poultices. Men and women of every origin. Free folk, Dothraki, Northmen, even a few battered survivors from Molestown and beyond, lay cheek to jowl, sharing blankets, sometimes trading curses, more often sharing stories of kin lost and victories won. Jon passed a pair of Dothraki boys huddled beside a spear wife twice their size, their eyes round with a fatigue too deep for tears. They watched him as he strode by, saying nothing, but their attention lingered, like a blessing or a warning. He paused only once, at the tent where a free-folk girl sang a lullaby for a dying horse. Her voice rose and fell, steady as a heartbeat, unbroken, even as the beast's breath rattled thin and finally stilled. Jon closed his eyes, sent up a wordless prayer to any gods listening, and walked on. At the heart of the camp, Val and Tormund stood in heated discussion before the great fire. Sparks snapped in the air between them, making Tormund's beard glitter like a burning bush. Val's arms were folded, mouth set in a grim line. Tormund waved his hands, carving great arcs in the smoke. Their words were clipped, pointed, a debate over supplies, prisoners, perhaps even the shape of the future itself. As Jon approached, Tormund broke off mid-sentence and pointed. "There's the wolf come to sniff out the next fight," Tormund said, voice gruff but not unkind. "You've a gift for trouble, Snow." Val's gaze was sharp as a knife's edge. "We argue how to house the prisoners. Tormund says give them raw hides and turn them loose with clubs. I say keep them near, share the same fires, let them see how we eat, how we live. You make an enemy's hunger your own, he's less likely to put a knife in your back come morning." "Nothing?" Tormund's mouth twitched beneath the beard. "Aye, but if you hand him the knife, he'll take it just the same." Jon weighed the question, feeling the world tilt around him. Every small choice a lever that might shift the future. "We watch them," he said at last, "but we do not starve or shame them. Every mouth we feed makes us stronger. If we turn raiders into kin, the next battle may be smaller. If not, we'll know soon enough. Hunger is a poor teacher, but a sharp one. Nepis stay. Val gave a satisfied nod. Tormund grumbled. You've too much hope in you for a crow. But there was pride in his eyes, and Jon felt it as an unspoken handshake between equals. They parted, Val to oversee the prisoners' quarter, Tormund to the edge of the camp, where a knot of free folk and Northmen were arguing over the division of salvage, timber, metal, the battered remains of an iron-borne shield. Jon took his post near the central fire. Ghost slunk out of the dark, muzzle wet with brine, and settled beside him. Together they watched as the Dothraki finished their midnight rounds, checking horses and gear, sharing hard bread and wine as they sang songs in a language thick with longing and loss. The night seemed impossibly wide, yet more crowded than he had ever known. He closed his eyes and let the sounds fill him, the wailing of gulls, the crackle of fire, the deep rumble of the surf, the scattered laughter and low voices. He could almost believe it was peace. He did not sleep. Sometime past midnight, Val returned, face gaunt with fatigue. She carried a cup of broth and pressed it into his hand without a word. They sat together, silent, and watched the fire dwindle. Later, Lyanna approached, face pale beneath smoke and windburn, her arms still streaked with dried blood. She crouched beside Jon and spoke quietly, her words low and hesitant in the broken common tongue she had picked up since winter began. "You do not rest," she said. He shook his head. "Someone must watch." She nodded then, after a pause, reached for the dagger at her belt. She placed it on the ground between them, blade facing herself. It was a gesture of trust, one Jon recognized from stories of old Dothraki blood oaths. "We lost half the riders," he said, voice flat. "But those who live, they sing of you as Khal, as Wolf Khal. Some want to go south, take plunder. Others say we are horse and wolf now. We run together or we die." Jon watched the blade catch firelight. "We run together, we fight together. If you wish to leave." Lyanna shook her head. "No, Dot. The south is poison. Cities eat you from inside. I would ride here, under sky, even if it kills me. But the riders must see strength, not just fire. They follow what does not break. If you show them weakness," she shrugged, as if this needed no explanation. Jon understood. He wrapped his hand around the dagger's hilt, pressed the flat of the blade to his heart, then handed it back to her. "Then I will not break." Lyanna smiled, fierce and sad. She rose, sheathed the dagger, and vanished into the night. The wind shifted. Far out beyond the surf, a dark swell moved against the tide, shadows slipping north, broken ships vanishing into dawn. Jon watched until the shapes dissolved into mist. When the first gray light filtered over the sea, he stood, stretched cramped limbs, and went to wake the sentries for the new day. The days that followed were a blur of action. There was no room for grief or memory. There was only labor, endless and hungry, chewing at every moment. Jon led salvage crews to the ruined ships, stripping them for timber, nails, oil. They pulled splintered hulls ashore, fashioning them into walls for new shelters, platforms for archers, fences for horses. Ironborn prisoners worked alongside their former enemies, under the watchful eyes of free folk and Dothraki alike. There were few fights, and those that broke out were short, bloodless, anger spent more quickly in hard work than in long vendetta. Word spread swiftly through the wild lands. Ironborn defeated at the Shivering Sea, Jon Snow leading free folk, Dothraki and Northmen alike. Ragged bands drifted in from the east, hungry and desperate, drawn by rumor and smoke. Women with children, old men limping behind makeshift sleds, a few battered knights and small folk whose fortunes had been broken by other wars. Each new arrival carried old loyalties, but hunger was a tongue that everyone spoke. Jon welcomed them all. After Tormund and Val had questioned them, after Lyanna's riders had checked their camps for hidden knives. One evening, a stranger appeared on the ridge above the camp, wrapped in a black cloak trimmed with silver thread. He carried no banner, only a staff topped with a raven carved in bone. John watched from below as the man descended, Ghost pacing his heels, eyes never leaving the stranger's face. When they met, the man drew back his hood, revealing a shaven scalp tattooed with swirling runes. His eyes were deep-set, ice blue. Yet his voice was low and warm. "I bring word from the gift," he said. "I am Maester Jaren, once of Old Town. Lady Sansa's grain reaches Molestown. Her archers hold the roads. But there are rumors of unrest, lords who do not wish to see wildlings prosper, who fear a kingdom rising beyond their reach." John nodded. He felt the weight of the old world in those words. The slow, inexorable pressure of the South, of lords and crowns and suspicion. "We have no kingdom, only a hearth." Maester Jaren smiled. "A hearth is where kingdoms are born, and a fire, if tended, spreads." John invited him to the council, where Willa recorded his words in her bark-bound ledger. They debated the future late into the night. Jaren warned of new skirmishes in the south, of Lannister gold moving north, buying swords and rumor. He spoke of raven messengers, of broken vows, of the 1,000 little ways a fragile peace could be undone by envy, by fear, by hunger. John listened. He gave orders for double watches, for scouts to range south as far as the last river. Vayana's riders spread through the woods, swift and silent, their eyes sharp for signs of movement, for strangers in steel. A week passed, then another. The camp changed, imperceptibly at first, then rapidly as the last snows thawed. What had been a ragged collection of tents and lean-tos became something firmer. New shelters rising from shipwreck wood and driftwood, new pens for the horses, new hearths where strangers gathered to eat and sing. Val organized a kitchen at the camp's heart, her voice carrying above the clatter of pots and the laughter of children. Tormund oversaw the hunters and builders, his temper flaring less often now that there was always more work than argument. Vayana taught young Dothraki and free folk to ride and shoot together, the old divisions blurring. Still, trouble brewed. Small thefts turned into larger ones. Tempers flared when food ran short. A fight broke out over a loaf of hard bread. One iron-born prisoner stabbed a Northman, only to be beaten near to death by the crowd. John intervened, hauling the beaten man to the council circle, where he was judged by Val, Tormund, Viha, and Willa. Anna. And Willa. The verdict was exile, but not death. He was to be given food, water, and a knife, then sent east, beyond the Milkwater. The law was new, raw, but it was theirs. That night, John found sleep elusive. He wandered the camp's edge, pausing to look south across the ice fields, imagining the distant lights of Winterfell, the faint glow of hearths he would never see again. Ghost pressed against his side, warm and reassuring, his fur thick with the scent of pine and earth. He thought of his family, of Sansa's careful letters, Bran's riddling missives, Arya's silence. He wondered if he would ever see them again, if the world they were building here would survive the next storm, the next hunger. He remembered Daenerys, her eyes bright with fire and grief, her voice promising to break the wheel, to make something new. He wondered if he had done better or only made another kind of cage. He was still standing there when Val found him, her breath rising in clouds. "You burn too hot," she said. "You'll turn to ash if you don't rest." He laughed, soft and bitter. "There's too much to do." Val shook her head. "There's always more. But you're not alone, Snow. Let us carry it. You made this place for all of us, not just for you." "Natway." He looked at her, at the firelight flickering on her pale hair, her fierce eyes. "Do you believe in it?" he asked. She met his gaze. "I do. I believe we can be better than we were, or die trying." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They stood together, watching the moon rise above the dark edge of the woods. Spring came in sudden fits, melting snow in great, slumping drifts, flooding the Milkwater, softening the hard-packed earth beneath boot and hoof. The ice broke with a roar that carried for miles, the river running wild and swollen, carrying dead wood, silt, and the bones of things lost in winter. The camp shifted, grew, stretched along the riverbank, its people restless and eager for new work. They cleared ground for planting, using old ironborn shields as spades, turning earth thick with roots and stones. Jon organized work parties. Dothraki learned to cut sod. Free folk planted seeds scavenged from abandoned villages. Northmen taught the children how to dig irrigation channels, how to find the best shoots for planting. Some old-timers grumbled. The free folk did not plant. The Dothraki did not fence horses, but hunger was a strong persuader, and soon even the most stubborn found work that suited them. In the evenings, they gathered at the new long hall, its beams lashed with sinew, its roof thatched with reeds and drifted grass. Fires burned in great iron cauldrons, laughter rang high and bright. There was music, drums and fiddles, pipes carved from bone, voices lifted in harmony, old songs and new wildling chants, braided with Dothraki melodies and northern dirges. For a little while, the scars of war faded, and hope grew roots. Still, scouts brought news of unrest. South of the river, bands of men loyal to minor houses, White Harbor, the Rills, even old Umbers clinging to their pride, were gathering, watching, waiting. They sent envoys, all stiff-necked and suspicious, asking questions Jon could not easily answer. "What is this place?" they asked. "A kingdom? A freehold? Are you Jon Snow, king beyond the wall? Or are you something else?" Jon replied, as he always did, "We are survivors. We are a hearth, not a throne. We answer to need, not to banners." It was not enough. The envoys went home with narrowed eyes, their swords untouched but their tempers rawed. Dewy. Jon knew trouble would come, but he refused to yield. He had no crown, only a promise, to hold the hearth against winter, to keep the law they made together. One day, as the first shoots of green burst through thawing earth, a rider came from the west, battered and winded, his cloak torn, his horse lathered with sweat. He carried a message, sealed with the direwolf of Winterfell. Jon read it in the council tent, surrounded by Val, Tormund, Vihana, Willa, and Maester Jaren. "Brother, there is talk of your people growing strong, of the wild folk planting grain, of Ironborn fleeing north and east. I have kept the lords at bay, but they will not wait forever. Some say you seek to carve a kingdom from the bones of winter. Some say you are the last wolf. I trust you, Jon, but I must ask, what do you want? What do you dream for those you lead?" Sansa. Jon stared at the words a long time. Around him, the council argued. Val said to send a feast and an open invitation. Tormund said to send her the heads of the lords who doubted. Vayana said to ride south and show them the power of unity. Maester Jaren advised patience, caution. "The South will not welcome a new hearth so close to their own fires," he said. In the end, Jon wrote a letter, short and true. "Sansa, I want peace. I want a home for those who have none. I want to plant what I can, so those who come after have more than we did. I do not seek a throne. I seek only that the children of this land live to see another spring." Jon. He sent the letter by raven, and for a time, silence followed. In the restless days that came after, the first trade arrived. Barrels of salt fish from White Harbor, rough woven cloth from the Rills, iron tools scavenged from ruined castles. In exchange, Jon's people sent furs, herbs, smoked meats, a cask of strange Dothraki liquor that burned hotter than wildfire. The envoys who came to bargain were wary, but they saw no crown. Only a community, scarred but proud, working together, keeping the peace. It was not all harmony. There were still thefts, still fights, still nights when the memory of burning ships and dead friends rose like ghosts from the long grass. But slowly, the hearth grew stronger. Each new mouth fed, each quarrel settled. Each wall raised became another strand in the tapestry Jon and his council wove. As spring deepened, the days grew longer, the air softer. The children learned to swim in the river's calm bends. Old grudges faded, replaced by 100 new stories, some true, most not. Songs drifted on the wind, echoing over fields where wildlings and riders worked side by side. Over the long hall, where laughter outshone sorrow. Over the forests where ghosts ran with the wolves at dusk. Jon Snow walked among his people, sometimes a stranger, sometimes a friend, always the watcher in the night. He bore no crown, sat on no throne, but when the fires burned low and the old stories were told, they spoke his name as they spoke of the new kingdom, rising at the edge of the world, a kingdom with no borders, only a hearth for all who sought shelter, a kingdom made not of blood or banners, but of hope and the hard work of survival. As the first crop sprouted and the last ice melted from the river, Jon climbed the ridge above the camp and stood with Ghost at his side. He looked out over the new land, the fields and forests, the curling smoke from dozens of fires, the wild horses grazing, the battered remnants of iron-borne ships, now turned to tools and shelter. He remembered all he had lost, all he had done, all he had become. He remembered the promises he had made, the blood he had shed, the pain and the joy alike. And as the sun rose over the shivering sea, Jon Snow smiled, not as a king, but as a man who had chosen at last to belong to something greater than himself. The kingdom he built would not last forever. Nothing ever did. But for one season, one heartbeat in the long memory of the world, the wolf, the horse, and the free folk stood as one, and that was enough. Caw. The North remembered, but the North also changed. As the ice retreated under the press of spring, Jon's camp at the river became a settlement, and the settlement slowly grew into a town. It happened in fits and starts, tents swapped for timber shacks, shacks stitched together with planks and stone until streets formed where only muddy tracks had wandered before. Children of all colors and shapes learned to play in each other's languages, and arguments at the long hall grew less frequent. Less about old grievances, and more about planting, the best way to smoke fish, or who would get first cut of the next wild elk brought down on the plain. Sometimes Jon could see it, the way hope spread outward like thaw, cracking the old ice of suspicion and habit. Not every freefolk clan welcomed the Dothraki, nor did every Northman lose his wariness overnight. There were fights and thefts, and once, a night of blood, when a group of young men from Deepwood Motte tried to set fire to a Dothraki horse pen, only to be caught and beaten by riders, and then in turn, nearly killed by angry freefolk before Jon intervened. He had not killed the arsonists, though Val had demanded it, and Vihana had spat in the dirt at his feet. Instead, Jon called a council at the new stone circle they built atop the ridge, where flame could be seen for miles. He summoned not just the 3 circles of the town, but any who would come from the nearest wildling and Dothraki camps. All gathered, wrapped in cloaks or leather, knives at their belts, arms folded, suspicion in their eyes. Jon stood before the council, tired but unbending, and recounted what had happened. The arson, the riot, the way tempers had nearly torn the new kingdom asunder in a single night. Justice is not vengeance, he said, voice carrying over the hush. If we begin answering every crime with blood, we'll have nothing left but ghosts and bones by next winter. These boys, he gestured to the bruised and broken would-be arsonists, heads bowed in shame, are not our enemies. They are our burden now. They must work beside the people whose horses they tried to burn. And if they fail, if they run, if they betray us again, then the snow will have them. Tormund had grunted at that, but Val nodded, her eyes hard as river stones. Lyanna said nothing, but she had brought water for the boys before the night was done. In the weeks that followed, the town learned a new law. A law of shared labor, of justice not dictated by blood, but by necessity. Some called it weakness, others called it wisdom, but for the most part, the people kept to it. The boys rebuilt the horse pens, mucked stables, dug irrigation ditches, and stood unarmed at the perimeter each night on watch. By summer, they were less resented and more ignored, which was as much forgiveness as the town was willing to give. Jon worked beside them, as he always had, refusing to sit apart or above. He hauled timbers, sawed planks, spread gravel and ash along the worst of the mud paths. His clothes were always dirty, his hands cut and scarred. At night, He ate in the long hall with everyone else, bowl in hand, listening as Tormund or Vihana or some new speaker argued over water rights, hunting boundaries, or what to do with the first iron-born children born in their midst. Sometimes Val would catch his eye and smile, rare but fierce, as if to say, "It is working, you stubborn fool." Trade increased. Caravans from White Harbor, the Rills, even the far-off Vale brought news and goods. They paid in iron tools, salt, and silver. In return, Joan's people sent furs, smoked fish, berries, and the first rough glass beads that Maester Jaren and his young students had managed to forge from river sand and driftwood fires. The first time a caravan arrived, escorted by both a Northman and a wildling outrider, Jon stood in the cold and felt the shape of his dream, still ragged, but more real than he dared hope. Not all the news was good. There were rumors of southern lords plotting together, angry that the king beyond the river now sent his own envoys south, that a new northern market outcompeted the old, that Sansa's patience had limits. Once a wounded crow arrived from the Night's Watch, gasping that wildling bands far east had been seen moving south, bands Jon had never heard of, bearing strange banners, moving as if chased by something worse than cold or hunger. Jon sent riders to scout, but nothing came of it except frightened children and a few lost sheep. One day, Maester Jaren arrived at the council ring bearing a letter sealed with the Merman of White Harbor. Lord Wyman's grandson, the new Lord Manderley, offered terms of peace and warning. "There are men in the south," Jaren read, "who see your hearth as a threat, who whisper of another rebellion of dragons and wolves. The Queen in King's Landing sends her eyes north. Tread carefully, lest the fires you build become beacon or funeral pyre." Jon listened and said nothing. After, in the dusk, he wrote his own reply, measured, calm, offering friendship but making no apology for what he had built. He knew, as did every soul at his fire, that old powers never truly slept. He only hoped their winter would be long and deep before they rose again. With summer, the settlement bloomed in truth. Wild grass grew green over the old battlefield, and the horses fattened on it, their coats glossy, manes adorned with beads and bells. The first wheat sprouted in ragged rows along the riverbank, carefully tended by free folk who had once sworn never to plant a seed. The Dothraki, for their part, learned to hunt elk with bows from horseback, bringing down their prey with hoops that startled the crows and made the children laugh. At night, fires burned bright in the long hall. The storytellers found their voices again, braiding together tales of the long night and the grass sea, of direwolves and dragons, of kings and slaves, and all the shades between. Ghost lay beside Jon, half listening, half asleep, his red eyes flickering with dreams Jon would never see. Sometimes Sansa wrote, her letters careful and diplomatic, always ending with a line or two of affection, a memory from their childhood, a request for news of his health. He wrote back, sparing details of hardship but not hiding them. When he mentioned the birth of the first child of the new town, a girl with dark hair and bright blue eyes, born to a free folk mother and a Dothraki father, Sansa's next letter arrived with a swaddling blanket. "Fine as anything made in King's Landing." Arya never wrote, but once, in the middle of the night, a girl arrived at the edge of the settlement, riding a piebald horse, her hair cropped short, her eyes wild and clever. She stayed only long enough to share a meal, ask 100 questions, and hug Jon so hard his ribs cracked. She was gone by dawn, leaving only a dagger on his pillow, and the memory of her laughter ringing in his ears. Bran's ravens came less frequently, but his messages were stranger. Dreams of storms at sea, hints of dragons in the east, warnings that the world turns, brother, and all roads twist toward the north, in time. Jon read these in silence, shared them with no one, and kept watch on the horizon as always. With the second harvest came the first true threat. It started small. A trade party gone missing in the woods south of the river. A free folk scout shot with southern arrows. A Dothraki boy returned to camp with a broken arm and a warning. Armed men in the woods calling themselves True North, swearing no loyalty to Jon or Sansa, or even the Starks of old. At the next council, tension ran high. Tormund thumped the table with his fist. "Let's ride south, smash their camp. Show them what free folk do to those who hide behind banners and blades. Val's mouth was a thin line. Violence breeds more violence. If we start a war now, we will not see another winter. We must offer them peace, food, a seat at the hearth. Bayana said nothing at first, then spoke quietly. If we show weakness, the riders will not follow, but if we show only steel, the others will leave. There must be both. Willa Birchbark, now grown into the role of chief scribe and speaker, raised her hand. Why not send envoys, as we did before? Invite their leaders here. Offer a feast. Let them see we are strong, but not their enemies. John listened, weighing the voices. At last he nodded. We send envoys. We send food, medicine, and word of welcome. But we also set a watch at the river, and no one crosses without leave. If they come in peace, they may stay. If not, we will defend our hearth. The envoys went, Tormund, Viana, Willa, and a Northman called Jarrett. They returned 3 days later with a ragged group of men and women, hungry and wary, but not yet hostile. Their leader was a hard-faced man named Brune, a former knight of the Rills, who had seen 3 wars and trusted no one. He sat at the council fire, ate Jon's bread, drank Jon's wine, and told his story. His people had been cast out by new lords, their lands seized, their homes burned. They had nowhere to go but north. Jon listened and found himself moved, despite his doubts. You may stay, he said, if you work and live as we do. There are no lords here, only the law we make together. Brune hesitated, then nodded. The men and women of the true north found work, food, and, slowly, a place among the others. There were fights at first, suspicions, threats made in the night. But over time, grudges faded, replaced by the hard fact of survival. A town could only stand if all pulled together. Autumn brought its own anxieties. The sky turned slate gray and the air took on the sharp tang of ice. Hunters ranged farther for meat. The last of the fish were smoked and salted in great racks along the riverbank. Sickness struck once, a fever that swept through the camp, felling dozens in a week. Maester Jaren and Willa worked day and night with the healers, boiling water, brewing herbs, keeping the sick apart from the well. Jon himself carried water, changed bedding, sat with the dying. The fever passed, taking a handful of old and very young. But the town mourned together, and grief became another thread in their bond. That winter, the snow fell early, thick and silent, muffling the world. Supplies ran low, but no one starved. The council decided who ate what, how much wood was burned each night, how far hunters could range. The Dothraki took to skiing on planks of pine, racing down icy slopes, laughter ringing through the trees. Free folk children and Northmen joined them, and soon even Tormund was seen tumbling down the hill, beard packed with snow, bellowing with mirth. On the longest night, they built a fire on the ridge. The whole town gathered to sing the old songs, to remember the lost, and to swear anew the oath of the hearth, that no one would freeze or starve while others had warmth or bread to share. Jon spoke last, voice hoarse, but steady. And as he finished, the aurora flickered above them, green and gold and blue, as if the old gods themselves were blessing this fragile, fierce thing they had made. Spring returned. A new child was born, a boy dark-skinned and blue-eyed, who became the pride of both Dothraki and Freefolk. The town sent a runner south to Mole's town with news, and soon other children arrived, orphaned or lost, sent north to the hearth where, rumor now had it, no child ever died alone. Trade continued. Southern merchants grew bolder, even friendly. A man from the Reach arrived with grapevines and new seeds. The first small market blossomed beside the river. Stalls selling woven cloth, carved bone, bright beads, trinkets, and tools. Jon wandered among them, anonymous in the crowd, listening to the pulse of his people, hearing laughter and quarrels and the sound of coins exchanging hands. There were still threats. Once, a party of Lannister men arrived on fast horses, their armor too bright, their words too sweet. They stayed 3 days, then left with promises of friendship and profit. John watched them go, eyes narrowed, knowing the South would never truly trust a hearth beyond its rule. But there was little he could do, except keep his watch. One night, as a summer storm battered the roofs, a raven came from King's Landing. The seal was black, the script unfamiliar. Maester Jaren read it aloud at council. "Jon Snow," called King beyond the river. "Her Grace, Queen Rhaenys of the House Targaryen, first of her name, requests your presence at King's Landing. You are to attend her court and swear fealty, or send envoys in your stead. Refusal will be considered an act of rebellion. By the Queen's hand, Sir Edric Storm." The council erupted, Lyanna cursing, Tormund roaring, Val staring at Jon as if to gauge his heart. Willa read the letter again, her face pale. "They mean to test us," she said. Jon nodded. "If I go, I may not return. If I refuse, they may send an army. Either way, our peace is threatened." Val looked at him, her voice low. "Do you want to go?" Jon thought of Daenerys, of dragons and fire, of what oaths had cost the world. He thought of Sansa's careful warnings, of Bran's strange dreams. At last he shook his head. "I do not want a throne. I will send envoys. We will offer peace, trade, and alliance. But we will not kneel to any crown, not while the hearth stands." Lyanna drew her blade, pressing it to her palm. "We ride as one." Tormund grinned, showing broken teeth. "Let them come, and let the South taste real winter." Willa wrote the reply, short and firm. "The hearth of the North offers peace and friendship to the Queen, but bows to no lord or crown. We are the people of the river and the woods, the horse and the wolf. Let us live as we will, and you will have no truer friends." Summer burned on, hard and bright. Crops ripened, the horses grew fat, and the children ran wild through the fields. Once Jon climbed the high hill with Ghost, watching as the sun set over the river, the town's fires blooming one by one, lanterns winking in the dusk. He thought of all he had lost, all he had found, all he had made. He thought of the price paid in blood and bone, of the hope that had somehow survived. He knelt, stroking Ghost's fur, and whispered thanks to the old gods, the new, and any powers that watched over the hearth he'd built. No kingdom lasted forever. But for now, at the edge of the world, peace held. Jon rose and turned back toward the town, lantern light gleaming on wood and stone, on faces familiar and strange, on the banners of wolf and horse, and free folk now flying side by side. He walked home, carrying the weight of winter, and the promise of spring, into the heart of the North's new dream. In Nishta. The mornings came bright and cold, dawn brushing the new town with frost so fine, it sparkled on every roof. Jon awoke most days with the sun, his mind already moving through lists, names of the hungry, the ill, the restless. Tools that needed mending, fields to check, patrols to rotate, and always the knowledge that word from the South could arrive at any moment, dragging with it storms of expectation or threat. Ghost was usually gone by then, already prowling the forest edge or padding silent rounds through the mist-veiled streets. As much a symbol of the town's spirit as Jon himself. He had no title, but they called him many things. Jon the Hearth, Wolf Call, the Free Lord. Sometimes even just Snow, spoken now with affection or complaint, never as a curse. Sometimes he smiled at the names, more often he just accepted them. A man made half of legend and half of mud. He liked best the mornings when he was simply a laborer, pushing a barrow, lifting stones, or working side by side with Northmen, free folk, Dothraki, and the others who now called this place home. Those first warm days of high summer felt like reward, though everyone knew the work had just begun. The old South Road, once little more than a game trail, was now a rutted track, busy with carts and horses, drawing in more traders with each passing week. New faces arrived with every caravan, refugees from squabbles between the lesser lords of the North, wandering hedge knights, even the odd maester seeking sanctuary from the politics of Old Town. Some stayed, some left, but all of them carried stories, gossip, and news that rippled through the town like summer rain. On a bright morning, with cloudless blue above and the town's banners flapping lazily from the ridge, Jon and Val walked the eastern edge where new fields were being cleared. Val wore her old spear strapped to her back, and her long pale hair braided with wildflowers. They paused at a rise overlooking a swath of black earth where Dothraki and free folk, men and women alike, worked shoulder to shoulder. "They're learning from each other faster than I thought," Jon said, voice low. Val nodded. "They learn hunger first. After that, pride can be softened." She knelt to test the soil with her hands, rubbing the dirt between her fingers, sniffing it. "Good earth. We'll have barley and beans here. Maybe even rye if the frost holds off." They watched as a young Dothraki girl laughed and tossed a stone at a Northman, who was showing her how to plant a row straight. The Northman grinned, corrected her grip, and guided her hand with patience Jon recognized from his own years in the Night's Watch. Children darted between rows, collecting grubs and beetles, some carrying baskets bigger than their heads. Jon felt the tightness in his chest loosen. Just a little. "I never thought I'd see it. All these folk side by side." Val rose and brushed her hands. "You made it possible. You and your stubbornness." She watched him, appraising. "You haven't slept." Jon snorted. "Who sleeps in summer?" Val's mouth twitched, nearly a smile. "You'd best start. Winter's never far." Then, a shout from below. Someone had turned up an old bit of chainmail in the dirt, and 3 children were already squabbling over who got to keep it for armor. Jon waved, then made his way down to mediate, leaving Val shaking her head, bond, and exasperated. He spent the rest of the morning in the fields, then with the carpenters raising a new hall by the river, then at the stone circle where traders haggled and tempers sometimes flared hotter than the fort. By noon his back ached and his shirt was soaked through. He stopped at the cook fires for a bowl of stew, ate it leaning against a wagon wheel, talking quietly with 2 elders from different clans. One Dothraki, one free folk, about winter stores, hunting rights and rumors of bandits in the southern woods. "Not bandits," said the free folk elder, spitting a bit of gristle. "Desperate men. They come for food, not gold." The Dothraki nodded, his scars catching the sun. "Let them come hungry, but keep your blades sharp." Jon listened, promised to send more patrols, then left them to their meal. By afternoon he was back at the Long Hall, council in session. Willa Birchbark read out the news, a letter from Sansa, guarded but warm, promising new supplies from Winterfell once the harvest was in. A warning too. Lords from White Harbor and the Dreadfort were meeting in secret, their messages laced with concern about the independence of the Northern Hearth. "We are not a threat," Willa finished. "But they fear what they do not control," Tormund snorted. "Let them fear. Fear makes folk cautious. Caution keeps swords in scabbards." He grinned around at the council. "Let's send them a barrel of sour goat's milk. That'll keep them talking." Vayana, seated at Jon's right, offered another way. "Send gifts, yes, but send stories. Let their traders see our feasts, our dances. Let them carry home news that we are many, and strong, and more interested in living than fighting." Val agreed. "If we look too much like a kingdom, they'll sharpen their knives. If we look like a hearth, they may let us be." Jon heard all, made his decision. Gifts, feasts, and open hands. No banners, no threats. But no apologies. We have a right to live. Nambi. The council broke for the day, and Jon left Willa to pen the letters. Tormund to supervise a new stockade at the south gate. Vihana to drill the riders. Val to oversee the kitchens. He wandered down to the water, Ghost trailing him, stopping only when he reached the rocky bend where the river rushed loud and clear, carving its own way north. He sat on the stone and watched the water. Sunlight flashed off the current, dappling the bank with coins of gold. Ghost sniffed the air and lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes half closed. Jon closed his own eyes and let his thoughts wander. He remembered the wall, the darkness of the true north, the bitter wind in his bones. He remembered Daenerys, her eyes burning, her dreams unraveling in blood and fire. He remembered every face lost, every hand he had failed to save, every oath kept and broken. He remembered too the day Arya had come and gone, The way her laughter had healed something in him that nothing else could touch. He wished for her wildness now, her courage, her knack for seeing the truth hidden under every lie. A shadow flickered across the water, raven or memory, he could not tell. He stood, brushed the dust from his clothes, and turned back to town. The days ran together, quick as melting snow. The settlement grew. New dwellings rose, the first stone granary took shape under the hands of Northmen masons and Dothraki laborers. The marketplace expanded, and children ran wild through the lanes. Ghost became a fixture, appearing wherever disputes flared, sometimes calming tempers just by his presence. Food stores rose, thanks to a good harvest and careful planning. There were no empty bellies that summer, though John knew it would not always be so. He held meetings with the elders, planned for winter, made certain every new arrival was counted, and every hand found a task. Idle hands, he'd learned, were as dangerous as an unguarded gate. Tormund grew into a kind of sheriff, his booming voice enough to settle most quarrels. Val became the heart of the town's healing, organizing care for the sick and aged, keeping an eye on those who grieved too long or drank too much. Ayanna trained the young, teaching the wildling and Northman children to ride and shoot, her own laughter carrying across the fields in rare bursts. Willa Birchbark, always scribbling in her ledgers, became the closest thing to a judge, settling disputes with a fairness that even the Dothraki came to trust. Under her eye the laws grew, not by decree but by consensus, and always open to revision. Trade flourished. Salt fish from the coast, wool from the hill shepherds, iron from old mines, glass beads, and rough pottery. A handful of maesters came north, some for knowledge, some for peace, some for love or escape. One started a school, teaching letters and sums to any child willing, and soon even the older folk came in the evenings, eager to learn. In late summer, a man from the Reach arrived with grape cuttings and a promise that wine could be made, even here, if the vines survived the frost. John watched him plant the first shoots near the river, half believing and half hoping the dream would outlast the planter. There were still threats. Southern scouts appeared at the edge of the woods, watching, counting, then slipping away. Once, a group of sellswords from the old wars tried to rob a trader at the market. John and Tormund stopped them, sending the survivors south with broken weapons and a warning. "We don't kill thieves, but we do remember faces." The seasons turned. Autumn gold touched the trees, and the first snows dusted the ridge. The crops were brought in, the livestock penned, the granary filled to the brim. The town held its first true festival. Fires, feasting, stories, songs from a dozen tongues, the aurora blazing above like a blessing. John looked out at the faces. Dothraki, free folk, Northmen, children with mixed blood and bright eyes, and felt for a rare moment the ache of longing give way to contentment. In the darkest days of winter, when the wind howled and snow buried the world, the hearth at the center of the town burned day and night. People gathered there to share warmth, food, and stories. It was then, with the old songs rising and ghosts dozing beside the fire, that John realized what he had helped create. A place not built by conquest or blood, but by need and choice, a place where the law was shared and the work never done. Winter passed, and spring again returned. Census letters were fewer now but longer, written in her own hand, full of news from Winterfell. Births, deaths, small victories, endless struggles with lords who would rather war than work. She asked John, more than once, if he would come south, visit her, bring stories of the new North. He wrote back as he always did. "When the time is right, my place is here, for now." Sometimes she sent gifts, books, seeds, a small steel mirror, a cloak of direwolf fur that must have cost a king's ransom. He shared all but the cloak, keeping it for the coldest nights when he missed her most. He thought of Bran sometimes, wondered if his brother still watched the world through raven eyes, if he understood the lives John tried so hard to build and protect. Arya was a myth now. Some said she sailed the Shivering Sea, others that she hunted bandits in the Riverlands, others still that she was dead and gone. John believed none of it. She was alive. He would know. he told himself, if she were not. In the third summer, a new threat came. Not steel, but plague. It started with a cough, a fever. A child sickened and dead within a day. Maester Jaren and Val worked without sleep, isolating the sick, burning bedding, keeping the healthy apart. A handful died, but the sickness never spread. The town mourned, then moved on, grateful and fearful both. Every victory, Jon knew, was bought with vigilance and luck. Trade brought more challenges. A wealthy trader from the south tried to buy up all the town's smoked fish, promising gold and gifts. Jon refused, insisting on fair prices and sharing with those who needed it most. Some grumbled, but most agreed. Hunger had been their first law, and would not be forgotten. Children grew into young men and women. The first marriages were celebrated, one between a free folk boy and a Dothraki girl, another between two Northmen who had found new life at the hearth. Old feuds faded, new friendships blossomed. Jon was asked to bless the unions, to speak for the hearth, and he did, feeling at once honored and out of place. There were small sorrows, deaths, departures, failures of crop or hunt. Each time the town gathered to mourn and remember. Each time the fire burned on. 4 years passed. The town grew and shifted, taking on a shape of its own. The stone circle became a meeting hall. The riverbank market was roofed with canvas and poles, then thatch, then proper shingles. The school grew, the granary expanded, and a forge was built where Dothraki and Northman smiths worked side by side. The first mill turned on the river, grinding grain for bread. Sansa came north at last, traveling with a great retinue. Knights, archers, cooks, even a bard. The town turned out to greet her, lining the lanes, banners flying, children laughing. Sansa rode at the head, her hair braided with silver, her eyes shining with pride and something like awe. She stayed a fortnight, walking the fields, visiting the school, listening to counsel, eating with the people. She spoke with Jon late at night, alone, sharing news and fears and hope for the future. When she left, she embraced him and whispered, "You did what we dreamed, Jon. You made a place for us all." He watched her go, feeling both empty and complete. Other visitors came. A Targaryen envoy, offering alliance. A Stark cousin from the south, seeking to marry into the town. Even a maester from Old Town, come to see if the tales of the free hearth were true. Some stayed, some did not, but all carried news of what Jon's people had built. There were threats still. Bandits raided, wolves preyed on the sheep, and one summer a fire swept through the market, destroying a dozen stalls. Each time the people rebuilt, stronger than before. Jon grew older. His hair turned silver at the temples, his scars ached in winter. Ghosts slowed, though he remained Jon's shadow, patient and alert. One winter night, Jon sat at the hearth. The long hall packed with townsfolk sharing stories. Children dozed in corners, elders nodded, and outside, the snow fell thick and silent. Val sat beside him, her hand warm on his. Tormund snored across the fire, boots still on. Biana leaned against the wall, smiling at something a young girl whispered. Jon listened as a boy retold the story of the first battle with the Ironborn. How Jon the Wolf Khal had rallied Northmen, free folk, and Dothraki to victory. The boy's eyes shone, and his voice rang with pride. Jon smiled, feeling the weight of memory and the lift of hope. He stood, raising his mug. The hall fell silent. "To the hearth," he said, voice carrying over the crowd. "To the town, to the free folk, to every hand and heart that built this place. May the fire never die." Then they drank together, the sound of voices rising like song, echoing into the long night, out into the cold, and up to the stars. And Jon sat down, at last at peace, knowing that in this place, for now, the fire would burn, and the north would endure. The winds off the shivering sea sharpened again as the seasons cycled, autumn slashing away the last green from the meadows, and settling a golden bone hush over the fields. The town, though it had acquired names in every tongue, and each person called it something different, grew more itself each month. Once it had been a camp, a hope, a rumor. Now it sprawled with new districts, a dozen little neighborhoods, stables and markets and smokehouses, and muddy, raucous lanes. Its heart was still the stone ring council, the broad long hall beside it, and the central fire burning from dusk until dawn. The fire's smoke marked their presence to the world, a signal neither hostile nor hidden, a promise that in the coldest wild, there was always a place for the lost. Jon had grown a touch slower, hair silvering at the temples and at his beard's edge, the creases at his eyes and mouth deepening into lines of endurance rather than age. Ghost, too, was older. White fur faded to a more wintered gray, but his eyes were bright, and his movements still light when the wind gusted or children called for games in the snow. They walked the edge of the town together, early and late. Jon's steps measured, Ghost ranging ahead and always returning, the sentinel and the shadow of something that could not be easily explained. In the cold mornings, Jon visited each quarter, sharing bread and salt at the cookfires, talking with elders and children and newcomers alike. He checked the granaries, the tanners, the weavers, the forges where Northmen and Dothraki alike shaped the tools of next season's hope. He helped clear ditches, mark fences, chase out a stubborn fox or wayward elk. Sometimes he sat quietly on the stones at the ridge, looking north, or on the carved log bench near the southern gate, watching for new faces on the road. Most of the time, he simply listened. Val was never far, moving with quiet confidence through the work and worry, sometimes taking his arm or catching his eye when a council dragged on, or a squabble over water rights, or marriage customs threatened to flare into something that would outlast the day. Willa Birchbark kept her growing library of ledgers and lists and lore, her ink-stained fingers as familiar now as her brisk, direct judgments in council. Tormund was the boisterous force behind the walls and hunts, his wild beard longer than ever, but his heart steady and his voice often the first to urge mercy or patience when tempers frayed. Vayana had become both legend and fixture, the Dothraki riders now, as essential to the defense of the North as any ancient clan, their numbers swelled by a second generation of children, as quick to speak in the free folk's tongue as in their own. She taught the town's youth to ride and shoot and run in snow, and to love the open sky, but also, sometimes, to Jon's secret pride, how to laugh in the face of hardship. Her voice was low and cool at council, and her blade was sharp in every argument, but Jon saw her sitting quietly some nights at the edge of the fire, her eyes lost to the horizon. That autumn, the town prepared for its greatest harvest yet. Grain and root and game laid up in the granaries, dried fish and smoked venison stacked high. Still, Jon and the council eyed the future warily. Every full storehouse felt like a challenge to the hungry and the desperate of the wider world. And the world was changing. Southern merchants arrived with ever larger caravans, their wagons heavy with luxuries, and their words heavier with politics. Some sought to buy land. Others hinted at alliances or treaties, each hoping to bind the North's new power to their own interests. A few offered bribes. More than one whispered threats. It was no longer possible to ignore the truth. The free town was a force, and every neighboring lord and queen knew it. Sansa's letters came with increasing urgency, her careful handwriting edged with worry. Trouble in White Harbor, bandits preying on the roads, old lords scheming together against both hearth and castle. Queen Rhaenys in King's Landing sent another envoy, a shrewd, clever woman named Mira Flowers, bearing gifts, news and polite but unmistakable reminders that the crown expects all the king's subjects to bend the knee, if not in body, then in spirit. Jon met Maera at the council circle, beneath a sky bright with banners. Direwolf, Stallion, the Raven's Wing, 100 marks of clans and bands. The envoy wore her house colors and a circlet of black pearls, her hair braided and eyes bright as embers. "You have built a city," she said without preamble, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "A home for the lost and the fierce. The Queen respects your vision, Jon Snow. But the lords of the South grow restless. Gold flows north, and with it come the swords of men with long memories and short patience. The crown must know." Are you friend or rival?" Jon answered as he always did, plainly, with a tired honesty that left little room for maneuver. "We want peace. We want our children to live. We want to trade, to farm, to defend ourselves if we must. We do not want a throne. We do not want a war." Mara pressed. "If war comes anyway." Jon's eyes darkened, and the years in them showed. "We defend our own. And we remember those who help us, as well as those who do us harm." She watched him a long moment, then nodded. "That will be carried south." They feasted Merera and her retinue for 3 nights, trading gifts and stories. Lyanna staged a riding display on the river plain, the Dothraki and free folk children racing horses through hoops of fire, arrows whistling, the crowd's cheers echoing over the water. The envoy scribes recorded every detail. Her guards stared in awe, and Mara herself seemed almost enchanted by the spirit of the place. When she left, she took with her a promise of further talks, a saddle worked by Dothraki hands, and 3 casks of the town's strongest mead. That winter was long and hard, snow falling early and deep. But no one starved. The town's stores held, hunters brought in game even as the woods grew silent, and the healers fought back a fever with herbs, rest, and luck. Newcomers still arrived, some half-frozen and desperate, others drawn by tales of a place where old hatreds mattered less than the work at hand. Jon welcomed them all, though each new face brought its own story, its own old wounds. Some nights, he sat by the council fire, listening to the music and stories, the laughter and the weeping. There were more children now, and their voices rang through the halls, shouts, song, even the first lessons of reading and sums that the maesters had begun to teach in the schoolhouse. Jon's own heart ached with a strange, unaccustomed peace. He wondered sometimes if he'd made a home, or simply a refuge. Was this truly a kingdom, or only a pause between storms? One evening, with the wind howling at the shutters and the fire snapping in the hearth, Sansa's raven arrived. Her letter was blunt. White Harbor beset by rivals. Queen grows anxious. Lords murmur of treason, of secession. I trust you, Jon, but soon the realm will ask, are you Stark or king, rebel or friend? I can only hold the line so long. Your word will matter more than your sword. Jon took the letter to council. Val read it aloud, her voice clear and steady. The room was packed, Tormund leaning forward, knuckles white, Lyanna thoughtful, brow furrowed, Willa already scribbling, mind churning through implications. We have lived as we wished, Jon said, without lords, without kings. But the world grows smaller. We must decide. Do we stand apart, or do we bind ourselves to others? Lyanna's reply was calm, unflinching. If you kneel, some will see it as weakness. If you defy them, others will say you lust for a crown. Tormund grinned, his laughter booming. We've had enough of crowns. I'll take another cup of mead and a warm fire. Not a throne made of other men's bones. Dendamental. Val said nothing at first, then looked at Jon. This is our hearth. But no hearth stands alone forever. What you decide, we will hold together. Willa read out the oaths sworn by the council, the laws built over years, the promise of food for the hungry, of shelter for the hungry, of shelter for the lost, of justice by the circle, and not by sword alone. We have built something new, she said. We have taught our children peace. Whatever you choose, the hearth must survive. Bender Wande. Jon spent that night alone at the ridge, ghosts beside him, the sky torn with winter stars. He thought of Winterfell, of the wall, of the woman he'd loved and lost to fire, of the children he might have had. He thought of Arya, still wandering, of Bran watching through 1,000 eyes, of Robb, of Ned. In the deep dark, he heard Ghost's slow breath and the distant echo of the old gods in the wind. Dawn found him weary but decided. At council the next day, Jon stood and spoke, his voice rough but certain. We will send envoys to King's Landing, to White Harbor, to every lord and queen who will listen. We will offer peace, trade, and alliance, but no oaths that bind us in chains. If they force our hand, we will defend ourselves. but we will not become what we fled. This is our hearth. Let it be known as a place of freedom, of law, of hope." The town approved, some with relief, some with defiance, most with pride. They composed letters and selected envoys. Willa for Winterfell and White Harbor, Val for the Vale, a Dothraki speaker for the Crownlands, 2 free folk for the coast. Jon remained behind, tending the town and the people who had come to trust him. Each day, he watched the horizon for ravens, for signs of trouble or change. News came slowly, as always in the north. White Harbor's new lord was cautious but friendly, seeing the town as a buffer against the Queen's more ambitious lords. The Vale sent gifts and promises. The Crown's reply was guarded. Mayor Flowers returned, bearing no threats but a list of terms and expectations. The lords who had plotted. Some fell quiet, some withdrew, some simply waited. Jon met Maiera again at the council fire, surrounded by his people. "The Queen offers alliance," she said. "Trade, roads, shared defense. But she asks too for tribute, for a token of loyalty. The realm is made strong by its bonds." Jon replied, "Bonds are chosen, not forced. We will share our table, our markets, our watch on the wild. We will not send gold or grain to fill another's coffers while our own go hungry." Maiera, clever and honest, respected that. She warned that the South would not forget, but she made no further threats. When she left, she took with her more gifts, and perhaps, Jon hoped, a sense that something new could survive in the cold. That spring, a new schoolhouse was built. A library grew, filled with ledgers, stories, and psalms. Tormund's beard grew longer, his jokes louder, his work gentler as he grew to love the town he'd once thought a prison. Lyanna grew quiet in council, but fierce in teaching, her own children among the best riders and archers on the plain. Val's hair silvered, but her strength was undiminished. Her healing hands and sharp tongue shaped the next generation as surely as any law. Jon grew older, watching each change with gratitude and a quiet ache. He never took a wife, though there were offers and rumors, nor did he have children of his blood. But in every face around the hearth, he saw his family, chosen, forged, tested by time and the world's cold indifference. One night, in the heart of winter, a band of raiders came from the east. Outlaws fleeing justice, drawn by tales of food and warmth. The town rallied, not with fear but with resolve. Dothraki and free folk rode together. Northmen and former Ironborn stood in the palisade. Archers and children of every blood filled the watchtowers. The raiders broke themselves on the town's unity, defeated more by hunger and hope than by steel. Afterwards, Jon walked among his people, binding wounds, giving thanks, mourning the dead and honoring the living. At the year's turning, as the aurora shimmered above the snow and the fire burned higher than ever, the town gathered for the feast. Old songs gave way to new ones. Old wounds faded in the warmth. Children born in the first winter now ran wild and free, their voices rising like birds at dawn. Jon stood beside the fire, Ghost at his heel, Val at his side, Tormund roaring stories to the crowd, Lyanna laughing with the children, Willa reciting the history of their years together. He raised his cup and spoke. "This is our home. We are wolf, horse, free folk, and more. We are not South, nor crown, nor banner alone. We are hearth. May it burn as long as the North endures." The cheers echoed long into the night, mingling with laughter, music, the crackle of fire, and the endless hush of snow. Jon sat down among his people, surrounded by friends and kin, and felt, for the first time in a long, hard life, a peace that was not simply the absence of war, but the presence of something earned, something lasting, something new. And as the dawn broke, painting the snowfields gold and pink, the town awoke to another day, another season, another chance to be more than any had dreamed. So it endured, at the world's edge, a light, a legend, a home. One day, the snow broke early that year. a slow, deliberate thaw that carved rivers in the roadways and filled every hollow with the sharp, clean scent of new beginnings. The town, if it could still be called such, had grown sprawling. Timber halls, stone storehouses, markets bustling with stalls, and the old long hall now standing at the heart like an anchor in a shifting sea. The free folk called it Harstead, though every tongue gave it a different name. The Dothraki called it Kalasar Hav, the Northmen favored Wolfhold, and to traders passing through from White Harbor or the south, it was simply the city at the edge of the world. Children born here spoke all these names, and many more, their lives richer for it. John rose every morning before dawn, never waiting for sunlight to rouse him. He dressed in plain wool and leather, boots battered by years, his sword a presence at his side but rarely drawn. Ghost was still with him, grier now, and moving with the slow grace of the truly old, but no less vigilant. They made their rounds through the alleys and squares, past steaming cook fires and muddy yards, where dogs barked and children tumbled together in the half-light. John's hair was streaked with silver, his beard full, his shoulders bent by more seasons than he'd ever imagined surviving. Yet the people greeted him with warmth, sometimes respect, sometimes simple familiarity. He was theirs, and they were his. Most days began at the council chamber, where the round stone table now sat in a house of its own, roofed and glazed against the weather. The council itself had swelled, elders from every circle, a scribe from the maester's school, a Dothraki leader, 2 free folk, a Northman and a craftsman, and even the quiet merchant woman whose far-ranging caravans now tied Harstead to a dozen distant markets. Val and Tormund were still pillars, the former now deeply gray and sharp-eyed, the latter half crippled by an old wound but stubborn as ever. Willa Birchbark presided over proceedings, her books and ledgers stacked ever higher, her judgment even-handed. Vianna had settled into a respected elder's role, her Dothraki blood braiding easily with every clan and kinship the city now claimed. The morning's business was mundane, a dispute over a burned granary, the question of opening a new quarry on the southern slope, news from a skirmish on the road east where would-be bandits were repelled not by arms, but by a patrol of mounted traders and free folk. John listened, offered advice, deferred when wiser heads prevailed. When tempers frayed, he calmed them. When solutions faltered, he urged patience. Outside, the city was alive with the stirrings of spring. The markets rang with hawkers and buyers, Dothraki horses stamping restlessly in their new stone stables, Northmen with carts of saplings bound for the Orchard Hill, the first free folk fishing boats testing the river's fast melt. By the docks, a shipment of iron and glass arrived from White Harbor, and John himself oversaw the offloading, talking with the captain and the dockmaster, ensuring fair weights, fair trade. These small things mattered. The city's peace was as fragile as ever, kept not by edict but by attention, by his willingness to remain among them, not above. Each afternoon brought new faces. Some were wanderers come to seek a place, others were kin of those who had come before. A handful were children from distant lands, sent by families who'd heard that in Harstead all ate and none were beaten for their tongue or their skin. John made it a point to welcome the newcomers when he could. He heard their stories, sorrow and flight, hunger, sometimes hope, the glimmer of futures they'd barely dared to imagine. By late spring, a caravan from the Reach arrived, bringing not just grain and olive oil, but cuttings for vines and saplings for apple and cherry. John walked the orchard's rise with the Reachman, a young lord's son with ink-stained fingers and more curiosity than pride. Together they chose ground and planned furrows, and John could almost see, in the curve of the hill and the stretch of new earth, the shape of summers yet to come. That night, as the fires burned down and the city's restless hush settled over the stone and wood, John stood in the orchard with Ghost at his feet and watched the stars emerge in the east. He thought of his father, of Ned Stark's silent strength and the weight of duty that had shaped both their lives. He wondered what his father would make of this place, this world unimagined in any lord's dream, a city of every blood and banner, founded not on conquest or birth, but on survival and choice. He did not wonder long. The world moved too quickly for much dwelling on the past. By dawn, he was summoned to the council. A trader from the southern road had arrived, bearing not just salt and wax but news. An army gathered at the neck. The queen's banners flew, and with them marched lords from the rills, the dread fort, and the hills of the Vale. Willa read the letter aloud, her voice trembling just once at the phrase, "The matter of northern loyalty." It was an invitation, thin as a threat, clear as ice. "Come south, Jon Snow, and answer for your city. Stand before the realm, kneel, and be forgiven, or refuse and be named rebel, oathbreaker, traitor, anew." The council splintered into debate, but Jon listened with an outward calm. Some called for appeasement, others for defiance. Val argued that no power could afford to ignore their unity, that war would cost the South more than it could gain. Tormund roared that the city should send the queen its dung and keep its steel. Lyanna warned that if Jon left, he might never return, but that refusal would bring armies and starvation, not just battle. In the end, Jon decided, as he always had, by trusting the strength of the hearth over the pride of the wolf. "I will go," he said, "but I will not go alone. We will send a true embassy, a council of our own, not just my voice. If they wish to see what we are, let them see us all." He sent word to Sansa at Winterfell, to the maesters at the Wall, to White Harbor, and even to the Queen's own court in King's Landing. Hearthstead would send its council, not as vassals, but as allies. It took a month to prepare. The city worked as it never had before. Stores packed, supplies loaded, patrols organized, every risk weighed and measured. The council elected 5 to go: Jon, Willa, Val, Lyanna, and the merchant woman, Dalla of the Silver Roads, whose knowledge of trade and treaty surpassed any maesters. The journey south was slower than Jon remembered from his youth. Roads were rutted, bridges broken by flood or neglect, and at every inn or holdfast, they found rumors of famine in the riverlands, of fire in the crownlands, of unrest even in the quietest valleys. The further south they rode, the less their name inspired fear or suspicion. Instead, folk along the way asked only if the stories were true. That in the city at the edge of the world, there was no lord, only law. No gold hoarded, only food. No banners, only a fire kept burning for all. When they reached Winterfell, Sansa greeted them with tired eyes and a deep, true embrace. She walked the castle's walls with Jon, told him of her burdens. Lords restless, bannermen grown bold, the old blood always testing her resolve. They spoke of old times, of Arya and Bran, of the dead they would never see again. Sansa asked him, as she always had, if he would ever return for good. He answered only that the hearth he'd built was his home, but that he would always come when she called. Together they rode south, Sansa leading her own delegation, the banners of House Stark riding beside the patchwork flag of Hearthstead. At the neck, they met the Queen's army, less than rumored, but fierce, a host of banners and shields, bright with the arrogance of rule. In the Queen's camp, the council stood before Queen Rhaenys. She was younger than Jon expected, her face hard, her eyes clever, her armor polished but worn at the edges. Beside her stood her hand, Sir Edric Storm and the great lords of the south, Anderly, Royce, even the Dreadfort's new heir. Rhaenys listened as Jon spoke, not of oaths or banners, but of law, of shared burdens, of what it was to survive and to make peace. Willa read out the hearth's laws. Val told the story of the first winter, of the promise made by the fire. Lyanna, her accent still strong, spoke of children raised to both ride and plant, to fight when they must, but to trade when they could. Dalla offered treaties, trade, mutual defense, open routes north and south. Sansa spoke last, her words measured and sharp, her authority undeniable. For a long time, the Queen said nothing. When she did, her reply was simple. "You have built something I did not imagine. I will not break what works. Let us write a new law. Let Hearthstead stand. Let its council sit at my table as allies, not vassals. The north is large enough for many fires, so long as none are set to burn the realm." The next days were spent in talks. Legal, practical, sometimes tense. In the end, They crafted a compact. The city at the edge of the world would send representatives to King's Landing, would open its markets, would offer refuge to any who came in peace. In return, the queen would leave them free, so long as they threatened no lord or neighbor. The council returned north that summer to cheers. The people greeted them not as heroes or conquerors, but as kin, as the stewards of a hard-won peace. Trade increased, more newcomers arrived, and the harvest was greater than any before. At the edge of the wild, a new city rose, not from blood and conquest, but from law and labor, from a fire kept burning through the coldest night. Jon grew older still. He watched the orchards bloom, the vineyards spread, the rivers flood and recede. He saw the city's children grow into new leaders, saw new faces rise to the council, saw Ghost's muzzle finally whiten with age. He felt his own strength wane, but he did not despair. Each year, he gave more of his burdens away, first to Willa, then to Val, then to the children of the town itself. One autumn, as the leaves turned, Jon sat by the fire, Ghost's head on his knee, and watched as the council debated a new law, a question of inheritance, of kinship, of what family meant in the city where every banner had found a place. He said little, letting the others find the answer. When the law was agreed, he nodded, content. That night, he walked the walls. The city was bright with torches and lanterns. He heard music in a dozen tongues, saw the lights of cook fires and homes, felt the warmth of the people's laughter as it drifted over the rooftops. He stood a long time, remembering every step that had brought him here. The wall, the wars, the blood, the hope. He thought of all he had lost and all he had gained, of Sansa, of Arya, of Bran, of Daenerys and the promise she had tried to keep, of every face that had built this place, stone by stone, choice by choice. He thought finally of his father and what it meant to make a home for those with nowhere left to go. Jon smiled. Ghost nudged his hand, and together they walked back to the fire, the world outside growing cold and dark, but the city at the edge of the wild burning brighter than ever. So ended the tale of Jon Snow, who refused a throne, who made a kingdom anyway, and whose legacy was not war or conquest, but the promise that the coldest world could be made warm if only enough hearts held the fire. And so the North endured, wolf, horse, free folk, hearth and hope, all woven together against the dark as the new age dawned.